Прийшли окупанти до нас в Україну, форма новенька, воєнні машини та трохи поплавився їх інвентар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Російські танкісти сховались в кущі, щоб лаптем посьорбати довбані щі, та трохи у чах перегрівся навар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Приперли зі сходу до нас барани для восстановлення
великої страни.
Найкращий пастух баранячих отар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Їх доводи всяке озброєння різне, потужні ракети, машини залізні, у нас на всі доводи є коментар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Вони захопити хотіли нас зразу, а ми зачаїли на орків образу з російських бандитів, робить примар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Російська поліція справи заводить, там вбивцю рашистів ніяк не знаходить, хто винен, що в нашому полі глухар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Веде пропаганду кремлівський урод, слова пропаганди ковтає народ, тепер нове слово знає цар.
Байрактар.
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 Yes.
The Leaf Spring Army sends its regards.
Русский военный корабль. Предлагаю сложить оружие и сдаться. Русский военный корабль, иди нахуй.
Hello, everyone. I'm the Enforcer, and I'm accompanied by Enforcer Matt.
And good evening, folks. It's Enforcer Matt, and welcome back to day 804 of the news. And it's good to see you all once again. And we're learning today that the Ukrainians are pushing the Russians back yet again. And it's good to see you all.
And of course, we're going to be covering the past 24 hours of, well, actually 48 hours of the news of the war in Ukraine. But we have gotten unbelievable news today over the past 24 hours. An absolute miracle. U.S. support is starting to flood into Ukrainian units on the front lines, and the Ukrainians have completely stopped every Russian offensive that is ongoing at the moment. They are not advancing anywhere along the front lines, and this means that the Ukrainians are now poised to be able to stop all the Russian offensives that were supposed to culminate in small victories on May 9th or before May 9th. This also means that the Ukrainians are now turning the tide of the war a second time. This is absolutely unbelievable and is once again in the complete defiance of what many military analysts were starting to say about Ukraine, as they were saying that these offensives were only going to start moving even faster as they carried on, but we're seeing that they're actually slowing down tremendously, and the Russians made practically no advances over the past 24 to 48 hours. And we're going to be covering all of that here on this channel, and also some other big news as well. We have been able to hear that the Ukrainians have caused severe, significant damage to Russian surface-to-air missile batteries inside the area of Crimea. We have also been able to hear that inside of Belarus, the Belarussians and the Russians have conducted tactical nuclear drills today, carrying on something that we've talked about a lot on this channel about tactical nuclear weapons in Eastern Europe. Not only that, we have heard that the British Ministry of Defense had a major hacking today, and it got hacked. We also heard that inside of Poland, there was a wiretap found in one of the rooms, and Don Ponzetti is now going to be spending 20 years in prison for gambling and racketeering. We also heard that down in the area of southern Rafah, the Israelis have now conducted their third invasion of the Strip and are currently trying to take control of the last area that Hamas fighters are currently inside of. All of this news mostly happening just over the past 24 hours, which is a lot.
I gotta tell you what, man. I'm super happy to hear of all those pieces of news that the Ukrainians are going to rob Russia of any efforts they were trying to make to have a propaganda victory by Victory Day. It's going to be robbed away from them, and now Russia's going to be going into that May 9th parade pretty much empty-handed.
Almost completely empty-handed, and we will be getting into all of that, but I want to make sure that we cover some of the big things that happened that were surrounding these major offensive changes today for the Russians that we have to say are just in the perfect amount of time. Moving on into Belarus really quickly, we heard today that the Russian Federation and Belarus were both conducting tactical nuclear drills. Many people know that we've been talking about this on this channel for quite some while, as this is one of the most concerning things in reality that appears to be leading to escalation in between the Western world and the Russian Federation and their allies. According to information from TASS, Belarus was to hold tactical nuclear drills together with Russia, and that was as of today. Of course, I do have to make this quite clear because a lot of people misunderstand that every time the word nuclear is used, that does not mean that nuclear bombs are flying and everyone's going to die. That just means that there are nuclear bombs that were involved in these drills, and this is something that is, of course, extremely escalatory. Nuclear weapons are the most dangerous weapon that has ever been devised by mankind at this point in history, and because of that, nuclear weapons are, of course, the primary thing that will bring up a great deal of concern to countries around the world whenever they're pulled forward and used. A lot of Western countries in Eastern Europe were greatly concerned when they heard that the Russians moved nuclear weapons into Belarus, specifically of the tactical nuclear variety. Tactical nuclear weapons are something that is not as devastating as an intercontinental ballistic missile. A lot of people believe that there is only one size of nuclear bomb, and that is the incredibly large, but tactical nuclear weapons are far smaller in their scale and destructive size than those of the strategic or intercontinental variety. However, these hold a very important place in the modern battlefield. Tactical nuclear weapons in a major conventional war in between two major powers would be pulled out to stop any kind of advances that would be conducted by one side or the other, and to completely decimate entire army corps with a single nuclear strike. These nuclear strikes have been considered to be really a cornerstone of the modern conventional battlefield when speaking of wars in between major conventional forces, such as those in between the Russian Federation, the United Kingdom, France, and the United States, also including conventional exchanges in between the United States, Britain, and France against China, or conventional strikes conducted by the Indians and the Pakistanis against each other. or by Israel against anyone in the region in the Middle East, or by Iran against anyone else, although we're not entirely sure whether they actually have a usable nuclear weapon yet or not. And also then North Korea, which doesn't do it in a tactical form, they only do it in the intercontinental form, but hey, you know, we got to give and let live a little here and there. But beyond that, tactical nuclear weapons are the first weapon that would actually be drawn out in the nuclear arsenal to be used against an enemy country. If, and let me make sure to put this out there because this is why the drill was so important today, if a conventional war did break out with NATO from the Russian Federation, and if those Russian forces started to be beaten back severely by superior NATO firepower, the Russians would start to use tactical nuclear weapons on U.S. forces and NATO forces that would be in the area. This means that large army corps, like I was saying just a moment ago, would be wiped out. That means that this drill today is not one of a normal kind, usually trying to test the reaction time of the intercontinental batteries, which is something that everyone around the world does fairly often. This is actually meant to show that the Russians and the Belarusians are making sure to show I guess you could say a show of force, the best way to describe it, to the Western world, that if a conventional war was to break out, their tactical nuclear weapons are on standby and ready to destroy any Western army corps that get in their crosshairs or their sights. This is...
And also, the only way that Belarus actually has nuclear weapons to use at this point is because Russia gave them to them. Because Belarus didn't have their own like native nuclear weapons before Russia actually handed some over, right?
That is entirely correct. They were all given to Belarus by the Russian Federation. And when I say give, that's a little ambiguous. We don't really know if the Belarusians are controlling the nuclear weapons or whether they're just housing the nuclear weapons for the Russians. Because during today's training exercise, it sounded like they are possibly in possession of some nuclear weapons that the Russians gave them. We're not entirely sure what it is, whether they actually control them or whether they not, but still it is something of a concerning conundrum that we're even having to ask to question whether the Belarusians are in control of them or not. But we were able to see that they did post a picture of an Su-25 today that was supposedly carrying tactical nuclear weapons, but
those are field tanks.
Yeah, it's quite clear that they blurred out drop tanks on this thing. I don't know why in the world they're trying to make them look like tactical nuclear bombs, but they didn't really do that good of a job. But beyond that, also I gotta say, what's up with the Disney crow on the side of the Su-25? Like, what? Why?
Oh.
Like, that's a
Yikes.
That's a little interesting if you don't know anything about the Disney crows. But beyond that, this is something that I gotta say, they didn't do that good of a job really trying to disguise this thing and make it look like it was actually carrying tactical nuclear weapons, but it does show that the Belarusians are at least trying to send out the idea to the world that they may actually have tactical nuclear weapons, along with the Russians, who are conducting the drills in Belarus today as well. We also got to see a picture of a Belarusian missile launcher. This appears to be one that would launch an Iskander-M missile, which can be tipped with a nuclear warhead. And we can see here that this is a Belarusian general who is speaking to the press in front of the launcher, once again trying to lead the world to believe that the Belarusians may actually have some kind of nuclear weapons that are actually in their possession. Notice how it's a Belarusian officer standing in front of the launcher and not a Russian one. Also note that Iskander-Ms, as a normal run-of-the-mill kind of a deal, can carry nuclear warheads. That's largely what an Iskander is made for the large part. They, of course, make a large amount of them that have conventional warheads as well, but there are some that do carry nuclear warheads on top of that. So, once again, it looks like the Belarusians are really trying to paint out this picture that things are not as they seem, or at least not the way it would normally be, where the Russians would be running the nuclear weapons themselves. It appears that they're trying to give the image that they may actually be in control of the nuclear weapons, and the Russians also have their nuclear weapons in Belarus at the same time.
I'm beginning to wonder if maybe... Can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm beginning to wonder if Belarus is maybe like bluffing the whole fact that they have weapons at all, because the fact they were showing that plane with drop tanks on it and claiming that's tactical nuclear weapons, and then also driving around that Iskander, I find it kind of hard to believe that Russia would actually give nuclear weapons to Belarus themselves to actually have in their possession, because that would be a huge risk to Putin's power at that point.
I would say it is a fair risk to Putin's power, but then again, Belarus is pretty much entirely on its own, even if it has nuclear weapons, and their only friend is the Russians. So there may be enough of a political dependence or a diplomatic dependence on the Russian Federation that the Russians deemed it would be okay to give them a limited number of tactical nuclear weapons, because the Belarusians aren't going to turn to the West anytime soon, because that will probably cause the Belarusian government to destabilize, which means the nuclear weapons would be in free fall at that point, and the Russians really wouldn't have to worry about them. The entire world would be worrying about them at the same time. But that brings us on into our next little bit, which is actually a little question that we have about the tactical nuclear weapons. It's something that a lot of people have been talking about today. A lot of people have been wondering if this threat is actually serious, or if it's merely saber-rattling that's being conducted by the Russian Federation and Belarus to once again try and strike fear into countries that are in the area of Eastern Europe. And a lot of people have had many different ideas on this. A lot of people believe that it's merely saber-rattling. Some other people say it's a serious threat. And some people are saying that they're slightly concerned, but they would like more info on it. I don't really know what kind of info that would be, but some people do want more info. But beyond that, a lot of people have had many different inputs on this. And Matthew, what are most people thinking about this nuclear news? And also, what are you thinking about it as well?
So it looks like about 59% of the audience says it's merely lame saber rattling by Russia, and 25% said it's a very serious threat, and 12% said I'm concerned but need more info. And on this one, I have to say that anytime any country holds nuclear drills, it would be a little bit naive to say that it's not a serious threat, because they are actual functioning nuclear weapons. But to think that Russia would actually launch them, that is still a last resort. That's not something Russia is going to do tomorrow just because they start, losing on the Ukrainian battlefield. I don't think that's going to happen. And also, I don't think that Belarus is actually in possession of nuclear weapons. I don't think that's the case. If they were, I would be absolutely blown away. I think those weapons are still under Russian control, and Belarus is simply acting like they're under their control, because we've seen in the past that Putin has made a point to say that those weapons inside of Belarus are his, and they're not Lukashenko's. So I don't think there's really much there on the Belarus front. But, like I said, anytime nukes come out, it is serious. So, Enforcer, what say you?
I would have to say that, in my opinion, it is actually a serious threat, considering that the Russians have moved these nuclear weapons forward, considering that they did not have to. They have now changed the balance of power in the nuclear weaponry category into their favor, considering that the amount of time to deploy and use these weapons is far shorter than it would be for the United States to do the exact same with our tactical nuclear weapons inside of Germany. Going off of that, I would say that this is entirely a serious threat. It's supposed to be a serious message. Of course, nuclear war is not going to happen tomorrow, and I've already seen some people in the chat saying, do you believe we're all going to get nuked in a few days? No, listen, we're not that guy who gets banned like every time he gets on Twitter because it's so misinformational, it can't even be counted as news. We're not going to get, no one's getting nuked in days, no one's getting nuked in weeks, no one's getting nuked in months. But the diplomatic messaging that's being caused here is extremely dangerous. These are nuclear weapons. Regardless whether they'd ever used them or not, they're clearly trying to provoke a response, or at least provoke pandemonium and fear, which will govern our decision making here in the West. And that kind of thing should be taken seriously. So I would have to say, if it wasn't for them being nuclear weapons, I wouldn't take this as that much of a big deal, but considering that they are nuclear weapons, I would say that this is a serious threat to Western countries, and they're once again trying to wave the fear of nuclear weapons over everyone's heads in Eastern Europe and try and change the way they think because of that. But moving on from that news, they may not have to worry about changing the way Western countries think, because they apparently have a good idea of what they probably think. It turns out today that the Polish security services found out that a room inside of a Polish governmental building in Warsaw had been wiretapped. They ended up taking out the wiretap, but apparently this wiretap was most likely controlled by the Russian FSB and was inside of a room that was about to be used for ministers to talk about energy issues of Poland inside of the room. This is something that is very concerning, considering that the wiretap was just found. We do not know how long the wiretap was in the room, what kind of meetings it may have listened in on, but this is still showing that the Russians are trying everything they can to get some information that may lead them to have a eureka moment on how to deal with Western countries and how to try and knock them out of supporting Ukraine. Considering that the room was about to be used to discuss energy issues, It may have been that the wiretap was just recently installed into the room and they were trying to see if the Polish government is seriously talking about any kind of damage that may be caused due to a lack of Russian gas or Russian oils, which were a small part of the Russian energy infrastructure system before the war, but have been completely phased out for alternatives. This is still something that I have to say is really bizarre, and I don't really know where to go with this, and it also begs the question, how many other government buildings inside of Poland or even in the rest of the Western world may possibly have Russian wiretaps inside of them, trying to gain more information on sensitive topics and issues that are affecting countries over here on our side of the world. Fairly.
It's why it's wild that there was anybody able to get in there to a government meeting room like that. It's like, don't they have like extremely good security around here, like people monitoring these rooms and stuff like that, even when they're empty? It's like, don't they have like guards standing around and stuff like that?
I would assume they do, but I believe this may have been possibly the best way to explain it. May have been an inside job, because usually things like this, wiretaps and all that sort of deal, are usually inside jobs. And a lot of people are about to say, "Oh, this is showing that there are people in Poland trying to rise up against this because it's wrong and the war's wrong and everything like that." Nah, that's not the case. If you ever look at the history of espionage and spying in the middle of the Cold War, there were so many people who would flip, be double agents, triple agents, in an unbelievable amount that we just publicly know about. Not even the people who are still classifying the information is behind closed doors, just the stuff we know publicly. There is an insane amount of flip-flopping that happened in the Cold War, from people who were in the CIA, people who were in the MI6, people who were in the KGB, people who were in the Stasi. Well, the Stasi, not so much. The Stasi was like walking on water, really. But really every single security agency that existed in the Cold War had tons of people that we know about publicly that ended up flip-flopping and pretty much being a double agent. Funnily enough, this is probably one of the funniest stories. In the MI6, Matthew, there was this guy who was actually working for the Soviets back in the 60s, and the MI6 said, "There's a mole in the MI6. We need to find out who this is." And then they said, "Hey, so-and-so," and he was the mole. They said, "Could you head the investigation to figure out who the mole is?" And he said, "Of course." And so he led the investigation, I think, for like 7 years, until eventually I think he was like, "I'm the mole," and then he defected to the Soviet Union, and then everyone was like,
Oh, damn.
"Wait a minute, the guy leading the investigation was a mole." So that, it happens. Like, this kind of stuff happens where there may be inside jobs. It's just a normal deal with intelligence and security and all that stuff. So going off of that, I'm betting that it was an inside job in the Polish government. That's why they had access to the building, access to the specific room, and were able to put the wiretaps in. Hopefully they can find who the mole was, but I have a feeling that probably will not happen. The mole will just keep wandering around and doing their own thing. But beyond that, it doesn't always have to be a mole that gets into your government, because in other instances, sometimes it's literally just foreign governments that hack in and get into your government. Like, for example, with the United Kingdom today. We heard that the People's Republic of China, it's now pretty much confirmed that it was them, ended up hacking into a Ministry of Defense database of a subcontractor that kept the amount of salaries and bank details of current and former service members. This is a little interesting because some people will go, "Oh, that doesn't matter. It's just showing how much money these people have." It actually matters a lot, because now they have a pretty good idea of who is getting paid what that's currently in the British military, and also possible information about who may be in massive amounts of debt or not. And going off of that information, the Chinese can start to target specific people in the British Ministry of Defense or in the British Armed Forces that may be in a large amount of debt or may not be getting that paid that well for their station, and possibly leverage that against them to have them start working for the People's Republic of China. This is kind of that preliminary work that would be used by a covert organization to start trying to create moles, or at least find a way to reach out to the people who would be the most likely to become moles. But this is still a little interesting and a little concerning. And hopefully we will be able to find out some information on who in the world actually did that, and who in the world out there is doing stuff like this for the Chinese, maybe directly the Chinese government, but still, it is showing that there are some security issues that are going on in the world lately. But Before we move on into the rest of the news about security issues that happened inside of Ukraine today, and many of y'all heard about that from our video that came out earlier today about the attempt to assassinate Volodymyr Zelensky, which we will be getting into a little bit later in the stream, but if you want to get to it right now, just go to our video and go click on it and take a look at it, because you'll get the news literally in the first part of the video. But moving on from that, it is time for us to move on into the frontline situation, because that is the big news of the day, that the Russians have been stopped along the entire front line. Over the past 24 to 48 hours, Russian advances have come to a standstill. There are only, I believe, one or two that I've seen, and they are incredibly small, only consisting of several dozen meters of advance moving forward, which is practically nothing. So I'm going to be showing y'all the map. This is Deep State UA's map. Bakhmut and the area of Avdiivka are the two most active battlefields at the moment. This is the 4th, this is the 5th, this is the 6th. And then I'm going to refresh and see if we can get the 7th. And it looks like they finally updated for the 7th while we were live on air. So let me show y'all that. So here's the 5th. This was Sunday. This is the frontline situation that we left off on. Here's the 6th. You can see a very small advance being made by the Russians just south of Otradtene. And then this is the 7th. Absolutely no change today. Not a single advance has been made by the Russians in 24 hours. This is huge. This means that the Russians will not be able to even get into the city of Chasiv Yar before the 9th of May, and this also means that they will not be encircling Ukrainian forces that are along the main highway near Kharlivka anytime before the 9th of May either. In fact, this may mean that the Russian offensive is completely run out of momentum and is now exhausted. Which is also really big and really good news. The reason being behind that is that the Russians are currently expending about 1,300 soldiers a day, wounded and killed, to try and advance. Regardless of the amount of advance, that is how much it's costing them to even try. They are not making any movements forward. This means that they're throwing about 1,300 guys a day down the drain, and they're not getting any benefit out of it. They're not getting any ground gained. They're not getting any incredibly high losses on Ukrainian forces, which I did look at that today to see how much we could confirm the Ukrainians are losing. It is still an incredibly small amount compared to the Russians. Today, I believe the kill-to-loss ratio in terms of vehicles was nearly 10 to 1 in the Ukrainians' favor. So going off of that, things are looking incredibly good right now in this frontline situation, much to the dismay of many military analysts who were starting to bank on the trending theme because, you know, many people out there, they look at this battlefield, if we zoom in right here, they look at this and look at it covering the whole screen, and oh my god, the Russians are moving to almost fill up the entire screen. Oh my god, they're all gonna lose! And then you zoom out, and then you realize that's practically nothing in Ukraine, and it may as well just be a blip on the radar as far as how far the Russians are getting to move on a day-to-day basis, and especially how much they moved over the past 24 to 48 hours alone. So going off of this, it does appear that the Russian offensive has been stalled, and we know why. U.S. support in the truckloads, the train loads, as a matter of fact, it's been entering Ukraine over the past few days, has already started to be fed to the units on the front lines, and those units are now being replenished in all of the precious ammunition and equipment that they were starting to run short on because of a lack of U.S. support for a large amount of time over several months, nearly a half year. Because they're getting all of that support now, we are starting to hear that the 155mm artillery pieces are churning out the fire. They are getting back up into the thousands of rounds per day over the course of the entire 24-hour period. And it is once again appearing that things are going just incredibly well out there on the front lines due to the massive amount of support. I'm going to be showing y'all a few clips that we got today from the area of Otradtene, showing that the situation is improving. But also, before we even get into those clips, I do have to show y'all this post that was made by the 43rd Artillery Brigade, which is near to the area of Avdiivka. It's kind of in the central Donetsk area. And according to them, it says, the combat unit from the 43rd Brigade, a little more shells appeared. We've been shooting since the morning. And then some kind of a weird, like, smiling face. I've never seen that emoji before in my life, and I never want to see it again. And then they said, I really hope that the projectile famine is behind us, because we are very hungry for destroyed enemy targets. There will be enough projectiles. It is important to use them efficiently and accurately. Therefore, the issue of intelligence is super important for us. Then, moving on from that, we can see some pictures of the peons, all that stuff. But beyond that, they have been replenished. The ammunition is once again flowing back in. They are saying that shells are starting to appear in larger numbers, and this means that they will be able to use their heavy artillery, such as the Panzerhaubitze 2000, the Caesar SPG, the M777, and others, to continue to lay down suppressing fire in the form of artillery on advancing Russian forces, greatly increasing their losses before they even hit the Ukrainian lines, meaning that the Ukrainian infantry will have a much less likely chance of being overrun by Russian forces and being forced to withdraw or retreat from their positions on the battlefield. Moving on,
one thing I've noticed, like real quick, talking about the supplies going to Ukraine, is when the U.S. had passed that bill, and we had been reporting that it would be about a week after the bill passed that aid would actually start going to Ukraine. Like we said, the U.S. military would have the aid delivered within a week. And that was kind of deceptive because the only thing the U.S. really delivered then was the ATACMS. They delivered a large shipment of that, but the other equipment, like we were learning from Zelensky and also the soldiers on the front line, the other equipment had not been shipped yet, and now it's just starting to arrive right now. So it's a couple of weeks down the road. So it seems like a lot of the equipment has been held up. So it was sort of a little bit deceptive, a little bit. But I'm glad to see it showing up because it needs to get there in time for that summer offensive.
It certainly does, and it looks like it certainly made it in time right now to already start inflicting massive Russian casualties, such as in the area of Ochrytine today, where we got to see that a Russian BMP was destroyed by the 47th Magura, a brigade that is made almost largely of Western equipment. But here's the clip of the BMP advancing. This is around the area of Ochrytine, from what we understand. It's moving through the wide open, of course, a suicidal move, but that's Russian. And gets hit dead on the nail. I don't even know what the hell the other part I was saying was, but it got blown up. Look at that. Shimmering and smoldering in greatness in the sunlight. Once again showing that the Russians are going to have a wonderful victory day. In fact, it got hit so hard, it flipped over. Toast some marshmallows on that thing. With that, we're going to be moving on from that clip and on into our next one, where we also got to see some of the vehicles that the wonderful and incredible 47th Brigade, the 47 Magura, has been using in this area. That's beautiful. An M1A1 Abrams.
Love to see it. I'm telling you what. I noticed, though, they still got the, looks like the, what is that, a road-like blocks on the treads or something like that? They haven't knocked the road blocks out.
What do you mean?
Those rubber pads, like in the center, aren't those for, like, for road use?
Oh, no, those are just permanently on the treads. That's just a normal feature.
I thought you could knock those out when you're, like, off-roading with those tanks.
I don't think that's normal, if they do. But I think it's always like that.
Huh. Maybe you're right.
But moving on from that, and on into the next picture, we can see the M1A1 in the travel position with the turret 180 degrees to the rear. In the next picture, we can also see it, once again, with the Tusk armor package along the side. It appears that the turret was never outfitted with the Tusk armor package. It was just a lower hull, but that is still really nice, because the Tusk armor package is a lot like the Brat armor package for the Bradley, and provides kind of the same armor protection. These kinds of I guess you could say protective panels don't do the same thing that composite armor does. These panels purely protect the vehicle from any kind of shaped charges. They do not protect from kinetic rounds. Kinetic rounds will pretty much pass through this like it's nothing. But if it's an ATGM, an RPG, or anything from an FPV drone, this Tusk armor will be able to pretty much stop any of the force being put into the armor or punching through the armor, meaning that the tank has a much higher rate of survivability in those kinds of situations. We can then see in the next picture that the back of the M1A1 Abrams appears to have taken some damage at some point. We don't know when that would have been. We can also see the commander up there in the commander's cupola, and we can also see that the commander's cupola, interestingly enough, also appears to have some kind of a Tusk bulletproof casing around the top of the cupola, which appears to be another Tusk modification. Still, the entire tank doesn't have the Tusk armor, because if you see one with Tusk armor all over it, it's actually a lot of armor. But they stripped the armor off the turret. They kept the protective casing for the cupola and also for the sides of the hull, but they didn't add any for the loader's position, which also has its own cupola, and then also the side of the turret, which is really interesting. But beyond that, that is a few pictures of some of the Abrams that are in the 47th Brigade service, and very nice to see those out in operation, still doing their thing. But with that, we're going to be moving on from that little bit of news. And also, someone just said needs a cope cage. And you know something that I saw, speaking of that, that appears to be the future of how a tank will be protected. It does appear, and this is going to be pretty shocking, this is like 180 compared to what we usually say, it does appear that cope cages will exist in the future on tanks as a norm, crazily enough, because we've actually seen that the Israelis have debuted a new kind of, I guess you could say, armor defense doctrine today in their invasion of Rafah, which we'll get into in a little bit in this stream, that is showing that there is a way to completely protect tanks against the risks of anti-tank guided missiles, as well as FPV drones dropping bomblets onto the roof of the tank, where not even a trophy system can end up protecting the vehicle. We will get into that in a little bit because it's a very interesting thing to talk about, but still, really nice to see an M1A1 Abrams in service of the 47th Brigade. Moving on from that, we didn't really get a lot of details from this battlefield today. We know that this battlefield did incur a high amount of losses for the Russians over the past 48 hours, but there just wasn't really a lot of video footage to back that up. Hopefully we can get some more video footage in the coming days and weeks. That'll help out greatly in letting us show y'all what is going on down there on the battlefield. But for now, all you have to know is that the Russians have taken high losses in the area, and currently the front lines have not advanced at all. Once again, showing that the Ukrainians now have control of the situation and are now dictating the way this battle will turn out, at least as far as the past 2 days have gone. But with that, we are now going to be moving on from that little bit of news in Avdiivka and up into the area of Chasiv Yar, another area that has become a major battlefield as Russian forces have desperately tried to race forward and claim some sort of a victory before May 9th. Over the past 48 hours, the front line literally hasn't moved an inch in this area, and we largely believe it's because of a very effective Ukrainian defense. Chasiv Yar is on the high ground, and not only that, right in front of Chasiv Yar, when we go down here, and I'll show you this right over here, there is actually this little drainage ditch canal right here that ends up causing some issues for a Russian advance come in the future. They will have to advance pretty much through this area right here where this pipeline is, in between these forests, meaning that this will be a massacre for Russian armor if it ever makes it into this forest. And not only that, there will be another massive issue. They can't really cross the canal. The canal is actually in a pretty big ditch. We saw that evidently down in the area around Klishkivka and also Kurdomivka. You can see kind of the ditch's slopes right here, but hardly. But this entire thing is in a massive ditch, meaning that Russian armor can't just drive through the canal, although it's pretty shallow, because they will have to go downhill, down an incline, and back up it, which is a very vulnerable area for the Russian army to be in. This means that they're going to have to move through this forest, or they're going to have to cross these bridges if they haven't already been destroyed or blown up, which is highly likely that once the Russians started to make it to this canal, the Ukrainians would blow up all of the bridges that are crossing it, and then the Russians would have to fight over this area right here just north of the town of Chasiv Yar, which will be pretty much a massacre for them and a great defensive position for the Ukrainians. So going off of that, it does appear that the Ukrainians do have the defenders' advantage as far as the terrain is concerned at the moment, and this is once again going to ensure that the Russians will not be able to advance into the town and take it by May 9th. We also got to see that heavy Ukrainian actions were taken today by the 43rd Artillery Brigade in the area. This is the brigade that we just heard got a fresh load of shells, and we can see the proof of that in the pudding in this clip today. So here's the little video that was made. And we're going to be muting that. But we can see a 122mm D30, and it is gone, and already burning immediately. Then we see another getting hit, and another. Someone in the chat, a bot said, you need a father figure. Why do I need a father figure when your mother calls me daddy?
Oh, man.
Get him out of here. But
Man,
anyways,
it must be Chris's mom.
it's actually Chris's mom's child. Not Chris, it's actually the other one, called Joe Curry. Very interesting. But beyond that, we can see that the Russian ammunition depots in the area are burning up. This is actually within the town of Yehidne, just on the northwestern side of Bakhmut. And we see them continuing to burn. And we can see another Russian ammunition depot going up in flames. And with that, The 43rd did show today in video proof that they have a lot more ammunition, and they're going to be using that a good bit more. With that, we are now going to be moving on from that clip and on to our next one in the area of Chasiv Yar, where we got to see the Kraken unit. Was in action today as well. Also, their sick editing was in action too, which was very visible in the clip. You can already see it right there. And we can see a vehicle run over a mine, and then the video stops right there.
It lagged, man. It caused it to lag. He had a little bit of trouble.
Wait, was that a part of the music video? Okay, I'm guessing it was just a glitch in the video itself. But we can see here Chasiv Yar, the drone flying over it and giving us an overview. And actually, interestingly enough, we can actually show y'all where this is in the area of Chasiv Yar. You can see a couple of high-rise buildings or really commie blocks in the middle of the town. And if we go off of that and we look for this forested strip right up here, this is probably very close to the ditch. So here are our high-rises right here. We do not see a metallurgical plant anywhere in this video. Well, hang on. We actually have a larger building right there and kind of like a yard of a sort. So that might be... That's actually really tough to find. That might be this area. Nah, I'm doubting it. But there is a large forested area right there, which is kind of shaped like this. So that is... Wait, hang on. I think that might actually be this. Yeah, yes. Okay, so it is this side. We're actually looking at this side of Chasiv Yar on the other side of the reservoir, looking over here at this forested area. Because you can actually see over there where that is. The ditch is somewhere over here. Somewhere in this area, but still interesting to see. We see Ukrainian forces battling the Russians on the other side of the ditch. We see the heavy damage that's been caused to the area of eastern Chasiv Yar as the M777s continue their fire support. We see them doing a little bit of work in the dark right there. We can also see them looking at the city some more, showing off the damage. We see more Russian positions getting hit by the drones. Of course, the backbone of Ukrainian firepower at the moment, as U.S. artillery will soon overtake that here soon. We see them continuing to show the remnants of Chasiv Yar. And that's the end of the clip, but still giving us a little bit of a look into what the battle around Chasiv Yar currently looks like at the moment. Moving on from that and on into our next clip down near Kurtubivka, we also got to see that a TOS-1 thermobaric system was hit in Bakhmut by the 93rd, the famous Fighting 93rd. The TOS is right down there on the street. And we see that the TOS may have just been hit right there. We can see what appears to maybe be a fire coming off the side of the TOS. And it is a fire coming off the side of that TOS. It might detonate at any minute. And here comes another drone hitting it dead on the nail.
Smack.
Schmack.
You know what you call a toss when it blows up?
What?
A tosser.
Oh, that's a good one. That's a very good one. And so with that, we're now going to be moving on from that little clip of that TOS-1A Sun Heat. I don't know why they call it Sun Heat, but, they're trying. But anyways, they knocked it out. And it is showing that the Russians, once again, aren't making any advances in this area of the battlefield. And it's giving us a very good indicator that the Russians probably never will. Probably will never at all make another advance well on into even the summer when they try the other summer offensive. But moving on from that and up into Kyiv, we do have to quickly cover something that was some pretty big news today that ended up turning out really good. Zelensky, if a few more days had passed, would have ended up getting killed in an assassination by the Russian government. Luckily, the plan was foiled by the SBU and all of the collaborators were arrested, but this is still something that is very concerning considering how deeply entrenched in the Ukrainian government it was, and also how fleshed out the plan was, because they actually described the entire plan in great detail. Zelensky is alive. That's what this entire news bulletin was for right here, is just to say that he's alive and safe right now. but this is the information that we have about the attack. So I'm going to make sure to read this to y'all exactly the way it was put out, so that way y'all can get the story as it was told and as we heard it. The network, whose activities were supervised by the FSB from Moscow, included 2 colonels of the State Security Directorate, who leaked secret information to the Russians. The enemy was actively developing plans to eliminate the president. One of the tasks of the FSB agent network was to search for executors among the military close to Zelensky's guard. The enemy's plan was as follows. First, the recruited agent was to observe the movement of the person under guard and pass information to the enemy. At the coordinates of the house where the official was supposed to be, it was planned to launch a missile strike. Then they were going to attack with a drone the people who remained at the site of the strike, also known as a double tap. After that, the Russians planned to hit with a second missile, including to destroy traces of the drone's use. Enemy agents were also planning to assassinate the Security Service of Ukraine head Malyuk and the main Directorate of Intelligence of Ukraine, Kirill Budanov. It is reported that the so-called Fifth Service of the Russian Federal Security Service, which is responsible for foreign intelligence, was in charge of the plan to assassinate the Ukrainian top officials. It was employees of the service who were engaged in subversive activities in Ukraine and collected information on its territory, which was supposed to help plan the Russian invasion. Here are the pictures of one guy who was arrested. Of course, they blur out the faces in Ukraine, so you don't actually get to see their faces. You just know that the SBU arrested them. We also got to see another person being carried away by the SBU right here. We also saw that apparently they had the Russian version of a Claymore at some point, somewhere in their possession. And also we got to see that they had an RPG-7 warhead that was intact and apparently had been shoved inside of a tire and then covered in a trash bag. I don't know why they did that. We still don't have a good answer as to why they put it in a tire. I guess they were trying to make sure that whenever they needed the RPG, it was just going to be ready and they could, I guess pull out a tire at the same time. I don't know. But beyond that, it is very lucky that this plan was foiled, because from what we heard, this was probably going to be the most foolproof plan they could try and conduct. If they used something like a Kinzhal or a Zircon hypersonic missile, the chances of the missile still getting through are low, but they're a little bit higher. It's around a 25%, 30% chance the missile may make it through. And in some instances, nearly 80% of all Zircon or Kinzhal hypersonic missiles that are fired end up making it through air defense, but those instances are rare. This means that the Russians were planning on using that missile in particular to target Zelensky wherever he was inside of a building. They would be able to kill him, meaning that this could have been only days away from Zelensky actually being killed, and that this plot being foiled was incredibly fortunate for the Ukrainian government and also for the Western world, because who knows what kind of chaos would unfold if Zelensky had been killed. There is a path of succession, or a line of succession in Ukraine if the president was to die, but who knows what would happen as a result of that. Beyond that, some people have been asking, was this Russia or was this an insider that had conducted this? And a lot of people are saying that it was Russian infiltrators into Ukraine. Some people are saying it was an inside job and had nothing to do with the Russians. And some other people are saying that they really needed more info to be able to come up with a positive conclusion to this entire story. But Matthew, what are people really thinking, and what are you thinking about this as well?
So on the topic of who was behind the actual assassination attempt of Zelensky, it looks like 58% said it was Russian infiltrators in Ukraine, while 20% said it was an inside job, meaning not Russia, and 15% said I really need more info. And from what we do know and what the enforcer just went over, I would say it's safe to say it's probably not a coup attempt. It's probably not an inside job, meaning Russia had no involvement in it. It sounds like Russia orchestrated this thing from the outside in and got these colonels to get involved in it. And it was ultimately a Russian plot to get rid of Zelensky, Budanov, and some others. And the mere fact they were trying to get rid of Budanov as well as some other people and not just Zelensky, that to me alone says that this was a Russian infiltrator operation in whole. So, I mean, we've known that the Russians are trying to go after Zelensky for a long time, so it's not a shock. But I would rule out the first option, honestly. I wouldn't say it was an inside job. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would have to also agree it was not an inside job. This was certainly the Russian government trying to coordinate efforts with some Ukrainians who were in the security directorate to conduct this, but this was entirely a Russian operation from beginning to end. It's not like Well, actually, this is a tough one to explain because a lot of people have been saying that this was kind of, well, a lot of Russian propagandists have been trying to say that this was the Operation Valkyrie of Ukraine. And to give a little bit of historical context to that for people who don't know, Operation Valkyrie was a plan that was brought forward by some German higher-ups in World War II, people, generals, stuff like that, who were involved in the inner circle of the Nazi government in World War II to attempt to assassinate Adolf Hitler in the middle of the war. They turned out not being successful, and all of them ended up being executed or being forced to kill themselves. But beyond that, a lot of pro-Russian propagandists have been trying to say that that was their version, the Ukrainian version of Operation Valkyrie, because, Zelensky is a Jewish Nazi somehow. But beyond that, I would have to disagree with that because Operation Valkyrie had really no involvement with the outside world or the Western world that much. And that's kind of a little hard to say because if y'all know anything about the end of World War II, y'all will know that a lot of people were actually trying to throw out Hitler throughout the entirety of the war, including Hermann Goering and Heinrich Himmler. Like, you wouldn't believe it, but they were talking to the Allies from, I believe, 1942 onwards, going, okay, like, y'all are serious. If I killed Hitler, I would run Nazi Germany, right? Y'all would just let that happen. And the Allies were like, yeah, we might. And then Heinrich Himmler was like, oh, okay, cool. And then Heinrich Himmler kind of figured out that it wasn't going to be possible, so then he ended up dressing as a common soldier and then kind of wandered away, and then he ended up either killing himself or getting strangled by someone. We don't really know which one it was. And then Hermann Goering also tried to do the same thing. He actually ended up trying to broker a peace on behalf of Hitler at the very last months of World War II, which led to him being forced into house arrest by Hitler near the Obersalzberg in southern Germany. So there was a good amount of Allied involvement in trying to overthrow Hitler during World War II. There was a good bit of that, but in particular in Operation Valkyrie, which is the kind of deal that the Russians are trying to compare this to today, or the pro-Russians are, not the case, because from what we understand, this wasn't a completely inside job from the Ukrainian government. This had a lot of Russian involvement in it, and really was sponsored and started by the Russians, and then they found their inside guys to help them out, which was 2 colonels in the security directorate. So going off of that, I would have to say that this was entirely a Russian-led business for the large part, I guess you could say, rather than an inside job like Operation Valkyrie could be considered. But with that, I hope that does address that the best I can. And also, I'm seeing some people talking about some interesting stuff. Let's see, Davis Campbell said Goering fled. Did he? Because I remember, hang on, I got to check this. Hermann Goering, because I remember he was put under house arrest, but I don't know if he fled or attempted to flee, because he did end up committing suicide at the Nuremberg trials, and they didn't get to hang him, although he was supposed to be the guy who was supposed to be the biggest deal to hang. So really quickly, let me look through his end of his life. Let's see here. Trial and death. Hang on, we need to look right before that. Let's see. Okay, so here we go. This is exactly what I'm talking about right here. By 26th of April, the complex at Obersalzberg was under attack by the Allies, so Goering was moving to his castle at Motterndorf. Wouldn't you? That is such a stupid sounding thing, oh, we're under attack, so let's go to a castle. It's like, they're gonna bomb. It's like, they're probably gonna bomb that too. But anyways, in his last will and testament, Hitler expelled Goering from the party, formally rescinded the decree, making him his successor, and upbraided Goering for illegally attempting to seize control of the state. He then appointed Karl Dönitz, who was the guy who ended up actually letting the Germans surrender on May 8th, the Navy's commander-in-chief, as president of the Reich, and Supreme Commander of the Armed Forces. Hitler and his wife, Eva Braun, committed suicide, as all of y'all know, on the 30th of April, which was like a week ago, a few hours after a hastily arranged wedding. Let's see, Goering was freed on the 5th of May by a passing Luftwaffe unit, and he made his way to the U.S. lines in hopes of surrendering to them rather than to the Soviets. So he actually did leave. You are correct, Davis Campbell. He did leave. It's just that he didn't really flee. It was more like Hitler had died, Germany was literally falling apart, so then a Luftwaffe unit was like, oh, you're free now, and then he was like, okay, well, I'm just going to go turn myself into the Allies, which I guess was an okay idea. I mean, he would have been executed by either the Soviets or the Allies, so I guess it didn't really matter. But apparently he had a preference. He liked the Americans better. But anyways, with that, I hope that does address it. Well, we had to make sure to get the history right on this guy. But we are now going to be moving on into our next little bit of news, which actually brings us into Israel, because we actually have a little bit of news about the ground invasion that has happened from Israel today, the third one into the Gaza Strip, the first one to ever go into Rafah. But before we get into that, some people have been talking about the risk of the Russians actually assassinating Zelensky. And a lot of people are saying whether that's going to be possible or not. Some people are saying that the Russians are incredibly close to assassinating Zelensky. Some people are saying that the Ukrainian Secret Service is incredibly good. Some people are in between, kind of down the middle, and don't really know which side to take on this. But Matthew, what are a lot of people thinking, and what are you thinking about that?
Okay, so this poll question says, do you think Zelensky's at risk of actually being assassinated by the Russians? Not just an attempt, but an actual successful assassination attempt, or an actual one. 51% said, yes, Russia is very close to doing it. 31% said, no, Ukraine's Secret Service is very good and would prevent it. And 10% said unsure, and 8% said, I need more info on it. And sadly, I have to say, I'm kind of with the 51%. Zelensky has very good Secret Service. They're some of the best. But at the same time, no organization is perfect. And the sheer amount of people that want Zelensky dead is really growing rapidly. Now, the Russians want to have him dead. Putin wants to have him dead. And other people do as well. There's probably some people, even in the Ukrainian government, that probably wants to get rid of him just because that's always the way governments work. There's always people that hate other people. There's factions in the government and things like that. So I think the risk is very real. And Russia is probably right on the verge of being able to pull it off. So hopefully Zelensky is ramping up his security a lot because he's at some very, very high risk right now. And I think this one today proved it. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would have to say, in my opinion, I believe that Zelensky is probably in a good deal of danger to possibly be assassinated, which will be a fairly concerning thing if it ever did happen. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. If Zelensky was to be assassinated, that's going to be a serious deal for the Ukrainian government and may even shake things up around the world. That may be why the Russians are trying so hard to have this go forward and have it done. But going off of that, I would also have to say that the Ukrainian Secret Service is incredibly good, and we have seen them looking inwardly at the Ukrainian government a lot lately, in fact, through the entirety of the war. So I would say that the Ukrainian Secret Service is really good. While the risk is always there, the Ukrainian Secret Service is incredibly good and is probably going to make sure that something like that does not happen. So I would actually have to go with the 20%. But with that, it is time for us to move on down into the area of Israel, as we did hear that the ground invasion of Rafah did begin today. Some U.S. military analysts, if you can take them at their salt, I don't know if you can, said that this was only a limited operation and the Israelis are not planning on anything big. But right after they said that, the Israelis cut off Gaza from the Egyptian border completely, from the, well, how do they say it? From the lake into the sea. The Gazans are now under Israeli control. I forgot what the actual phrase was that the pro Hamas people use. But beyond that, we were able to see that the ground invasion into Rafah did happen. We were able to get a little bit of news about that. We were also able to see some airstrikes that happened. In the next bit, we got to see more explosions and results of airstrikes. And the next clip, we also saw more.
ضخم جدا شرق محافظة رفح تحديدا بالقرب منطقة الجوازات واشتعال النيران في المكان بشكل ضخم وكثيف جدا هذا للعلم. ما زالت النيران والدخان بكثافة تشتعل في المكان المستهدف تحديدا منطقة الجوازات في منطقة البرازيل. كم نتمنى السلام.
And then moving on from that, after we got the proof of the airstrikes going on, we also heard the sound of helicopters that were operating around the strip as well. Here's the clip. hear the explosions continuing in the distance. Also, Matthew, I saw someone say in the chat, protest is not pro-Hamas, it's pro-Palestinian. And nah, not really, because they say we're pro-Palestinian, but then they go Hamas, go, you know, because that's pretty much the armed force of hell, the Gaza Strip is Hamas, so then they end up cheering them on, so it's really a pro-Hamas rally.
That's a tough one for me, honestly. Like, I can see the connection, but then at the same time, some of the people there in Gaza are at the mercy of Hamas. It's tough, though, because Hamas is so deeply embedded in Gaza. It's hard to distinguish between them and the civilians sometimes. It's hard to do that. So, you know, sometimes when we see people waving the Palestinian flags, they really represent Hamas, and sometimes they simply, you know, support the Palestinians. It's hard to tell.
Well, I mean, like, you know, that may be the case. And some people, you know, may be at the will of Hamas, but you can say the same thing in the United States. You can say the government that's in control in the United States isn't really the government of the United States, because some people only live under the government. You know, it's like, well, you know, it's still it's still kind of the people who run the place. And if you look at the Palestinian, well, actually, let me go to the Gazan parliament. Let me go down here. Let me see. Let's see here. We need to find the Gazan government. And let me go find that really quickly so that way I can get the governance of the Strip. So here we go. And let me go make sure that we get this right. Let's see. So here we go. So way back in 2007, Hamas took over the Gaza Strip and claimed themselves the de facto leaders of the Strip. So they are pretty much operating at this point because Fatah, which sounds like New York is saying father, is in control of the West Bank. But Hamas still operates over there a little bit. It's just not as much or hardly at all. And then Hamas pretty much controls entirely the Gaza Strip and runs the thing with an iron fist. And everyone in the Gaza Strip, you know, listens to the same rhetoric by Hamas about how they're going to do what they do to the Israelis, all that stuff. So going off of that, I'd have to say whether people, you know, are living under you know, Hamas and don't really support them or not, they're still there, and Hamas is the one in control of the Strip. So, you know,
I mean, I would, like Andy L said in the chat, it would help if the Palestinians would resist Hamas a little bit stronger, because to me, it seems like the Palestinians, some of them oppose Hamas, and then some of them are kind of just neutral to it, and then there are the Hamas supporters in the Palestinian group. So it's just hard to tell, really, because, you know, it's so tricky because Hamas rules a place like a dictatorship. So if people want to speak out against Hamas, you're probably going to get killed. That's just the bottom line. Hamas is still in the food that's coming there. They're just running the whole place into the ground. It's hard to get a read on exactly how many Palestinians want them there and how many are just okay with it. Because if they're okay with it, I'm like, you're kind of bringing the suffering on yourself, because you can't let the dictator stay there and just sort of be okay with it and then complain when stuff goes south.
And that's true. And I also saw someone say Israel does not want a two-state solution. Nowadays, they actually, from what I know, they may or may not. It's kind of on the fence. But the problem is, and we have to go all the way back to this, is that way back in the day when the United Nations took over carving up what is now Israel and Palestine today, they ended up carving up borders that were a lot more lenient to the Palestinians than they were to the Israeli Jews. It actually gave them a lot more land than them. And the Israelis accepted the proposition, and the Palestinians did not. They refused it. Then they started the 1948 Israeli War of Independence, because the entire Arab world attacked them all at one time, to literally erase Israel off of the map. So that's the world that they're now in. And a lot of people don't really draw the line there or really understand that. From what I can tell, they get into this and say, oh, well, you know, the Palestinians, you know, it's like, well, they had the chance back in 1948 to have a lot more land than they would. And let me go see if I can get the original 1947 Israel map and show you all what it looks like at the time. So this is, and let me see if it'll load here and get a little bit higher definition. Here we go. Here is the UN partition plan as it existed in 1947. wait a minute, we don't want to go there. I don't know what that website is. We don't want to go there. But this is the way the partition looked in 1947. It actually gave a lot of land to the Palestinians. The Israelis accepted this when this plan was brought forward. They said, this is fine, we can go with that. But it was the Palestinians who outright refused it and said, we should have all of the land. I'm not even kidding. They just said, we want all of it. Just kick them out. And then the United Nations said, well, that's a tough one. We're just going to leave it up to all of y'all. Figure it out. And then that's when, a year later, the 1948 Israeli War of Independence happened. And then at the end of that war, the borders that you can see here on the right side are what they look like largely right now. And that's what the Israelis ended up taking from the Palestinians after they lost the war. So a lot of people are saying, oh, it's wrong. You know, they should have accepted what they had in the first place. It was incredibly fair to both sides. It gave them almost an equal amount of land, both for the Israelis and for the Palestinians. But you know, of course, the Palestinians wanted it all, and nowadays the Israelis largely want it all. I mean, you know, like not joking, they really do. But that's how it kind of works down there, you know. And I'm not really here to get into the nitty gritty because there's going to be a lot of people who try. But that's how it began. You know, that's the footing they started off on, is that the Palestinians wanted all of it, not the Israelis, and now they live with the consequences of wanting it all and getting none. So, you know, that's really the only way I could tie it up, is to say it like that.
You know, the thing I don't understand, though, is when I see all the people waving the Palestinian flags and they're opposing Israel. It's like, I understand that when Israel goes in, there probably are going to be some civilian casualties because it's hard to really separate the civilians from the Hamas fighters. But at the same time, though, if they really support Palestine, why would they not support Israel going in there and wiping out Hamas and letting the Palestinians simply live free? It's like, why would they be against that? Because the Palestinian people are never going to rise up against Hamas. It's not going to happen. They're honestly just too weak to rise up against Hamas. They don't have the equipment. They don't have the willingness to do it. So, you know, Israel is their only hope. If you want to free Palestine, Israel is the only hope for it.
Yeah, I mean, it honestly is. What would be the best case scenario is if they could just agree to the territories that they would have, but that's not going to happen. That's not the world they're living in anymore. It's gone too far for that to happen. So one side is going to have to end up winning over the other, and at this point, it's inevitably going to be the Israelis, and the Israelis are probably going to end up, because we already know, because one thing that has been made incredibly clear by Netanyahu right now is that the Israelis do not plan on absorbing Gaza and just kicking all the Palestinians out and sending them to the West Bank or something. They are planning on pretty much government building in the Strip, completely dismantling Hamas, and then forming a brand new government that the Palestinians will self-govern within the Gaza Strip, but it will not have any Hamas or extremist Islamic views allowed inside the government. So pretty much what they're doing, in the best description I can give in a historical sense, is what the Allies did when they occupied Nazi Germany at the end of the World War II, which was denazification. They're pretty much doing extremist Islamification is the best way I can say it, and they're trying to knock Hamas out that way. So with that, I hope that does address that side of things the best I can, because I, saw that it became a very contentious topic in the chat, an interesting one, sure, and it's one that never has a clear answer, because half of everyone says that Palestine is the one who should run the whole place, and the other half says that it's Israel that should run the entire place. But beyond that, a lot of people have been actually putting this into a question that we've asked y'all. We've actually asked all of y'all if the United States should continue to send Israel military aid after Gaza has been invaded. And a decent amount of y'all seem to agree with that. Some of y'all say that that we shouldn't at all, and some other people are saying that it really depends on Israel's actions going forward. And so, Matthew, what are a lot of people saying about this, and what are you thinking about it?
All right, so on the question of whether or not the U.S. should continue to send military aid to Israel after Gaza has been invaded, it looks like 59% said yes, we should support Israel 100%. 18% said, it really depends on Israel's actions. And 17% said, no, we should stop sending military aid. And for me personally, like I said, I believe Israel is probably the only hope that the Palestinians have to get rid of Hamas, because they're not going to do it. So I see no reason to stop sending military aid to Israel at this point. So I support them 100%. Now, obviously, though, I would suggest that Israel does take some restraint, though, because they can't go in guns blazing too hard, because there are a lot of civilians which are indistinguishable from the Hamas fighters. And if Israel goes in guns blazing, acting like buffoons, civilians are going to get killed left and right. So I'm not for that, but I'm for a controlled and precision strike into Gaza to get rid of Hamas. So that's where I stand on the issue. But if y'all have heard already, the U.S. has actually stopped shipping aid about a week ago to Israel. They've held back aid going to them because of the situation in Gaza. To me, that's a bad thing to do. That was a bad decision to make. I'm going to leave it at that. But Enforcer, what say you?
I'll have to be quite honest, I do support the Israelis. I have to be open about that this is a pro-Western channel, and considering that Hamas is funded and supported by the Islamic Republic of Iran, which is an enemy of the United States, and an anti-Western force in the world, we have to automatically, by default, support Israel in this channel, because we support Western interests here. And that's just not up for debate for me, because I can't support an anti-Western force in the Middle East while also saying that we support Ukraine as a pro-Western force in Europe. That is a contradictory thing, and that would be hypocritical to have a completely different standard in one area versus the other when talking about Western interests. Going off of that, however, I would have to say that supporting Israel doesn't make a lot of sense to me. And I'll explain why. They are a Western ally. However, the current conflict that they're in with Hamas is an incredibly low intensity kind of a combat that they're in. It doesn't require a lot of resources. It doesn't require a lot of effort. It's not a conventional war like in Ukraine, where it's a multi-hundred mile long front line where it's constantly active along every length of it. This is an incredibly small area that we're talking about. I mean, it's literally minuscule. It may as well be the Avdiivka battlefield. And they're sending in a large amount of forces. They're dealing with an asymmetrical force. And not only that, it's sporadic amounts of fighting whenever there is. And so going off of that, it doesn't really make a lot of sense to be sending Israel massive amounts of military aid in billions and billions of dollars, because they already have an incredibly large military budget. They have an incredibly good military. They're not doing poorly. They're doing incredibly well. So going off of all of those things, in my opinion, it wouldn't really make a lot of sense to send money there, because if we have to end up penny pinching, then I would say that we should send the money specifically to Ukraine and Taiwan only, and then if the situation starts to become bad with Israel, then we start sending money there. So going off of that, that's largely what I would be believing, and largely what I would be saying about what's going on down there, because I'm all for the Israelis, all for the Western sphere in the Middle East, but at the same time, we do have to realize that some countries are better off than others given the situation at hand, and Israel is certainly that country that is far better off in their standing with the current goings-on than Taiwan or Ukraine is. And of course, some people are going to be saying, well, Taiwan isn't even a war, but Taiwan's military is incredibly backwards. I mean, if y'all ever go look at the kind of equipment that they have in the army, it is unbelievably backwards. It's like Cold War era tech from the US in the 70s, and we need to start giving them a massive amount of support and preparing them for the conflict that may be coming in a few years with the People's Republic of China, because if they fall, there won't be a war to even have in the first place. So with that, I hope that does address that the best I can, because some people are going to be like, dang, he's like pro-Ukraine, but he's not wanting to support Israel with money. Yeah, I mean, because you got to look at it for what it is, because if you look at it and you go, okay, we have all of these soldiers here, we have 10 rifles, and 20 of these guys have rifles, but then there's another 10 of them that don't have any rifles, and we have about 13 rifles to give out. So we're going to give out 5 of them to the guys who already have rifles, and another 5 to the 10 guys who have rifles, and tell them to sort it out. That doesn't really make a lot of sense to me. I'd rather just send the 10 rifles to the 10 guys without rifles, because the other 10 guys who already have rifles are fine as they are right now. And so with that, I hope that does address that the best I can, at least in my opinion, because I like to make sure that resources are sent to where they are needed best, at least in the diplomatic field. But with that, I hope that does address that quite well, and we're going to be really, really quickly, actually. Someone said, can we look at the map before it was Israel, or current day? It's which part? Because for a large amount of time, it was controlled by the Ottoman Empire. Then it was controlled by Britain as a mandate after World War I and up until 1947, and it was called Palestine then, although they were already trying to figure out under British rule what went to the Jews and what went to the Muslims in the area. And then before that, before the Ottoman Empire, it was controlled by the Byzantines for a while. And well, actually, in between the Ottoman Empire and the Byzantines, there were actually they were largely kind of like the Arab expansion that happened, or more so the Islamic expansion that happened, that ended up taking the land from the Byzantines. Before that, though, it was a part of the Eastern Roman Empire, and then before that, it was a part of the Roman Empire, and that's really where Israel first comes into being, is when the Romans marched into the area that is called Israel in the present day. They actually ended up coming up against not Muslims, but Jews, because the Jews lived there, and Islam didn't even exist as a religion until about 700 years later. And so the Jews at the time actually ended up rebelling against the Romans, ended up hiding out in the mountains inside of Israel. They all ended up committing mass suicide, and this was a whole deal at the time. And then, in kind of like in, I guess you could say, respect to the people that were living there at the time, which were the original Palestinians, which were actually Jewish, the Romans named the province Palestina, which is the Latin for Palestine. So then it existed under Roman rule, and then Rome collapsed, and then it turned to the Eastern and Western Roman Empire. The Eastern Roman Empire would live on as the Byzantines, and then this area was taken over, I believe, in 556 AD, which is the very early, well, even before the medieval era. This is what we call the Dark Ages in Europe, because at this time history wasn't really being recorded at all, because the Western Roman Empire had collapsed, and it threw Western Europe into a pit of despair and agony and horrible times. We don't even know what happened during it. But beyond that, around 556 AD, the entire area was taken over. The Jews were still living here, and when the Muslims originally invaded the area, we're just going to call them Muslims. They're made up by different ethnic groups, and that's a whole thing on its own. But largely, we're talking about faiths, because some people are saying that this land belongs to the Palestinians, and then it comes up to be a religious issue. The Muslims invaded in 556 AD and ended up controlling the area from 556 AD up until about the late 1890s. By the late 1890s, the Ottoman Empire, who was now the controller of the area, was starting to become quite poor, and the Jews in Europe started to come up with this idea called Zionism, which means that the Jewish people would have their own state. And they actually ended up having two contenders. They said it was either going to be Israel, or I believe it was going to be a Latin American country like Argentina. And then they ended up picking Israel, not because it was it was like the original Jewish Holy Land. It was actually just cheaper, so they could buy more land and get more out of the deal. So they ended up buying land from the Ottomans that was specifically for the Jewish, and that ended up becoming Tel Aviv. The center of Tel Aviv is actually the original land plots that the Jews bought from the Ottoman Empire back in the 1890s. Then, once many Jews in Europe started to find out that you could just buy land from the Ottomans, and they just give it to you, then loads of them started buying it. So then by the 1910s, and this was right before World War I, the Jews started to outnumber, or really match in number, the Palestinians that were living in the region. And the Palestinian Muslims that were in the area did not like this, because this meant that now the Jews, which have different, cultural, ideological mindsets than the Muslims, were now going to have about half the say in the area of how things ran. So the first real tensions began to flare off before the end of World War I even began, as the Jews and the Muslims in the area began to fight each other. The Muslims, from what we understand, the Palestinians really largely started it against the Jewish Israelis, if you want to call them that, although the Israeli state didn't exist, by attacking them in Tel Aviv. And this ended up leading to the first Zionist militias being created in Tel Aviv, which ended up fighting against the Palestinians in the area. Then the British finally moved through in World War I and ended up taking over the area of Israel. And then the British and the French both occupied Israel. Israel and Jordan were controlled by the British, as well as Iraq. And then the French took Syria and Lebanon. And these were called mandates. And the idea was that the British and the French wouldn't control these like colonies, like they did in Africa and India and other parts of the world. They were going to control these with the idea that after a set period of time, every single one of them would be released back into the wild with their own governments and their own kind of system. And so the British went about trying to figure out how the Iraqis, the Jordanians, and the territory of Palestine were going to move forward. They decided that the best way to do that for Palestine was to give land to the Jews, really, for the most part, because the Jews at this point started to outnumber the Palestinians a good bit. So they just went, why not? And then this pissed off the Palestinians because before the war, there was this agreement that had been made, but it was really just an agreement of convenience by the British, that they were going to give the land to the Palestinians at the end of World War I, and then they didn't. And so then this caused even more tensions in between the Jews and the Muslims in the area, and then they ended up fighting and killing each other a lot more. The British got caught in the middle trying to stop them all, and this ended up having everyone in the area pissed off the British, both the Zionist Jews and the Muslims as well. And so then finally, 1947 came around, the British were happy as hell to get rid of Palestine, because it was just becoming too much to handle and it was very expensive. And so they ended up backing out. The United Nations took over because the British literally just handed it over to the United Nations, said, this is too much, y'all figure it out. And so the United Nations said, okay, we'll figure it out. About half of the land will go to the Palestinians, half of the land will go to the Zionist Israelis, or the Zionist Jews at the point, because Israel didn't exist, so wasn't a thing. Well, Israel did exist in a historical sense, but in the modern sense, the Israeli state didn't exist, so you couldn't call them Israelis yet. It's like calling Americans Americans before America existed. So then the Zionist Jews, which were looking to have their own state, were like, that sounds sweet. We actually get a recognized state. We'll agree. And then the Palestinians said, no, 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 no. This is all ours. We're not agreeing to that. We're going to push them out. And so then that's what created the 1948 Israeli War of Independence, or the Arab-Israeli War, as it's really called nowadays, because it was really the entire Arab world going against the Israelis. The Israelis ended up kicking ass and winning the war, and then they ended up taking all of the territory that you pretty much see that they're in control of today, and they've kept that ever since. So when you put it in that kind of historical perspective, it's, you know, it's really hard to argue that it isn't their land, because a lot of people always go with the rule nowadays, whoever was there first gets it. And historically, the Jews, if we're talking about, I guess you could say groups as far as religion is concerned, the Jews existed 700 years before Islam ever did. And they also existed particularly in this one area. That is known. I mean, it's well known that they existed in this area for 700 years before Islam even became an actual religion, or even before Islam moved into the region. So going off of that, going off of that rule of whoever was there first gets it, it would go to the Israelis. All of it would, as a matter of fact. But still, that, you know, doesn't really account for the Palestinians that are there at the moment. So, you know, that's an argument for y'all. I just hope that addresses the history of it fairly well, or gives some backing for it. But with that, it's time for us to get back into the invasion news, which we were able to see that there was a capture of the Gaza border crossing by Israeli forces earlier today. We were able to see this on film. We now see them showing off the border crossing, now under Israeli control. And also, y'all are right. I said 700 years before Islam. It was more like 2,000 or so years. Because hell, there was even accounts of Jews historically in Egypt, in ancient Egypt, well before Islam, or well before 700 years before Islam. So that is correct. But we can see them here showing off the border crossing. And also, some people in the chat I see are offended by the word Zionism. In Zion, a lot of people.
What does that even mean?
So Zionism, do you know nationalism, Matthew? Like, nationalism, socialism, stuff like that. The kind of national concepts that came into being in the late 19th century. Zionism is an offshoot of nationalism. And Zionism is an idea that the Jewish people specifically would have their own state. Like an actual legitimate state, not just like a little community like there would be in Europe back before World War II, where in places like Krakow there would be a Jewish quarter in the city. Nothing like that. There would actually be a country that is specifically just Jewish. And that was the idea. A lot of people try and turn Zionism into something else. And I don't really know what they try and turn into. They try and make it into like this neo-Nazi kind of a thing, but the reality is it's just a concept that the Jewish people will have their own country. That's really what it is. And then a lot of people don't get that the Israelis even argued where in the world this country would be. It was never destined to be in Israel. Like I was saying a little while ago, it was actually destined to be somewhere in Latin America for a little bit until they found out it was just cheaper to buy the land in Israel instead and just go there. So, you know, that's something that a lot of people don't get. Zionism is nothing... Like, you know, Zionism is not like this boogeyman Nazi thing. It's largely just the Israelis, the Jews really saying, we want our own state where we can, you know, look after our own interests. And that certainly caught on at the end of World War II after 8 million Jews got killed in Europe. Then a lot of European countries, including Britain, who ran the place, were like, yeah, you know what, they might need their own country. Why not? Let's just give it to them. And so... I hope that does address that further. And also, I saw someone say Zionism is what anti-Semites call Judaism. No, it's not. Like, you know, it's been turned kind of into a political slur these days, like Nazi, but it's not. Like, it's a completely different thing. It's literally just like an American patriot, like an American saying the United States will have its own country where Americans live. It's kind of the same thing for Jews. So that's what it is. I mean, you know, like I can't argue it any further than that, because we actually learned about this in history in college. They were like, Zionism is an actual like nationalist idea. And you can see that right here. It's even on Wikipedia. You can just go read like a synopsis of the history of Zionism, because it's a nationalist concept. And then a lot of people think that nationalism is a bad thing, and nationalism isn't a bad thing, just like any other kind of a national construct is. I'm sure all of y'all are nationalists, because if you're proud of your country, like if you're proud to be an American, you're technically a nationalist. Like, you know, like, and then people don't get that either. They're like, what? Wait a minute, what do you mean I'm a nationalist? It's like, yeah, it's like you're proud of the country, so that's what nationalism is. But anyways, that's what it is. So if y'all want to look into it a little more, you know, research it, Google it a little bit. But Zionism is a thing. I mean, it's not a bad thing. It's just a theory of thinking. But anyways, with that, we're now going to be moving on from that and on into our next clip, where we got to see an Israeli M113 driving along the Gaza-Egyptian border. Check this out. They got the biggest flag they could find.
There's some big flags right there, good lord.
עד ציר פילדלפי, תראו איזה יופי, דגל ישראל.
And that's the end of the clip, but still showing them moving on in very clearly. I mean, they didn't make any ifs, ands, or buts about that. But moving on from that and out of Israel and out of that very long news segment that was not supposed to be long, it's time for us to get up into the area of Belgorod, where we got to see an electrical substation caught on fire. And we're going to be muting that. I don't know what kind of music that is, but we can see the substation burning.
It sounds like some American rap.
Sounded like it, and that's very scary when you think about it. But we see the drone flying on in to hit the substation.
That's a strange-looking substation. It's like Lego blocks.
Yeah, it is. It's kind of whack, I'm not going to lie. I don't know if I like it or not. And we see the substation.
I'm not gonna lie. I think the Israel talk brought out like a handful of like nuts. Like I've seen some nuts really pop up in the chat ever since you started talking about that. It's kind of wild. Like more nuts than like the Russian nuts that pop up when we talk about Ukraine. No, I've seen some crazy ones in here.
Dang. I just saw the one you banned. I mean, goodness. I don't know what's up with people, because people are sometimes, y'all. Not everyone, but some people are legitimately nuts. Like I can't even make ifs, ands, or buts about that. Absolutely nuts. But moving on from that and on to our next bit of news, we also got to see the Russian casualty report over the past 24 hours, which was incredibly high.
Oh, juicy! Look at that, so juicy. Robert over there on the side said, "How can these losses be sustained?" They can't, Robert. That's the point. They can't sustain this. They can't keep it up. The Russians are going down fast.
Oh, they are.
What the hell is that? You see that guy over there with the X over his face? What the hell? Is that a post-mortem picture? Or is that alive?
I think he was alive when that picture was taken.
Oh my God. And there's no blood in the system. He's just totally pale.
Dude, that guy, he went up to Putin and Putin said, blah, 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 I'm gonna suck your blood. And he was like, yes, Putin, yes, for life. But anyways, 9 Bobcat skid steers were knocked out, along with 1,160 Russian troops being wounded and killed over the past 24 hours, 14 armored personnel carriers, 32 supply trucks, 25 tanks, 37 artillery pieces, 34 drones, 1 cruise missile, and 1 anti-aircraft warfare system. Overall, the losses are incredibly high, and once again showing that the Russians are taking high losses for absolutely no gains at the moment. Moving on from that and on into the rest of the frontline situation, we got to see that up in the area around Kovalivka, PT-91 of the 117th was on the move. Really nice to see and really cool. Moving on from that and down to the area of Chernopopivka, we got to see that a Mr. S was hit really hard and was popping off near the town. There's our Mr. S right down there. I mean, you see it getting hit dead on.
Mr. S turned into Mr. Dead.
Mr. B.
Mr. B. What happened to you, Mr. B?
Tell you what, man, Mr. B. And that thing is cooking. And we now see them confirming its destruction. And overall, then and as, moving on from that, and slow, moving on from that and down into the area past, actually back into the area of Nova Idar, we got to hear that a Russian Su-34 was shot down today. Loss over Luhansk. Xenia and Volodya experienced train flown combat crew, died in battle, died as warriors. Aircraft number 21. The same one that is in the photo, drawings, paintings, and medals. Many of the stars on its left side are men. Eternal flight, brothers. My condolences, family, friends. Oh.
I hate it when they say eternal flight, brothers. Like, just say it. Just say it outright. They literally went in there, they got shot down, and they crashed. Like, just say it the way it is.
You'll broke neck when you hit the ejection button and your head hit the cockpit window. Probably it. Not eternal flight, eternal neck. But with that, moving on from that news and on to the next one, we got to see that an oil depot in the Luhansk area was hit and caught on fire. Call that thing toasty.
It's burning so good. Look at this.
And that's
toasty.
That's the end of the clip. Very nice. And moving on from that and into the next clip, we got to see another video affair. So toasty. So warm.
Temporarily occupied Luhansk, bliat, is on fire. Temporarily on fire, bliat. Permanently.
Look at it. Beautiful. Moving on from that and on into our next one, which is actually down in the southern front near to the area of Nova Pokrovka, where we got to see the Russians getting bombed by a hammer, which is a French bomb provided to Ukraine by, guess who? France. Check it out. There goes the first one, hitting dead onto the position. And this video is kind of like a slideshow. It's actually not y'all lagging, it's just how the video is. When you see the smoke dissipating after the strike. And those Russians are sleeping well. Slow! And moving on from that, and on into our next clip. We also got to see that near Kapani, there were a large amount of destroyed Russian vehicles. We're going to be muting that. But we can see them showing off a destroyed BMP. And we see more destroyed Russian vehicles down the street. A T-72B3 complete with cope cage. We can also see a destroyed truck. And
I
we
think
see
this car might need a jump starter.
man, they might need more than that. Like they might need a kickstart my heart or something like I don't know. But beyond that, a large amount of destroyed vehicles once again looking nice. Moving on from that clip and even further down the line and into our next ones into the area of Krenki, we got to see that the Russians were trying to avoid some drones near Krenki a little while ago. Didn't turn out well for them. We're going to be muting that, but we can see the Russians firing up at the drones. And the drone goes flying over at the top of the screen. You can see it there for a brief moment.
I see that Russian right there shooting at. He's going to try to mow his friends down while he's shooting at the drone.
Wait, did this guy just trip? Hang on. Look at them. Oh, bled, sucker, bled. It just trips. Then he's like, you know what? I'm going to crawl, bled. Crawl is better.
Oh, what, he hurt his leg from doing that?
I think
like,
so.
I've sprained my leg. Oh, what the hell is he doing?
He's doing the inchworm. Oh, bled. Oh, he's rolling. He did the tactical. Oh, he's out of there.
What the hell? So wait a minute, his leg wasn't hurt the whole time? He was being stupid?
Dude, he was just doing the inchworm.
Damn.
That's the end of the clip. And moving on from that one and on into our next one, we also got to see that down near Oleski, another Mr. S got hit and destroyed. Sorry, actually, this is the venerable Mr. B. Boosh! Hit dead on. And you see the little Mr. B right there, and it's smoking. And we can see that they now found a, something. I don't know what it is. It's a position of some sort. They're hitting it, though. We now see them hitting more Russians. Get the bush. Get the bush, bled. Slow! And that's the end of that clip, but really nice to see. Moving on all the way down to the area of Oleprestan, we also got to see the occupiers with a burnt ass starting a race. You see the drone blowing up in the building, and we're about to see the Russians begin the marathon. This is no charity marathon, that's for sure, but he is smoking a little. He's just smoldering a little.
He's just walking it off. Walk it off, man. You'll be fine. Oh. Oh, that poor bastard.
Oh, it's terrible. Sleep well. But with that, that is end of clip. And moving on from that, we also got to see a Magura equipped with an R-73 air-to-air missile. Never seen that before, but pretty cool.
That's sick. Putting missiles on the drone boats now, they're upgrading.
They are upgrading, that's for sure. And then also, we got to see a little bit of proof that ATACMS strikes have been knocking out some Iskander launchers inside of Crimea. Yeah, of course, that's kind of a deeper analysis. We're not going to get into that too much, but y'all can look at it if y'all want a little bit more detail. But Iskander sites have been targeted and destroyed by ATACMS. And so with that, it is now time for us to move on up to Kyiv to cover the speech from President Volodymyr Zelensky here on day 804 of The Wire. And so, without further ado, here is the speech from President Zelensky. Hello, my dear Ukrainians. Oh, here's the speech.
Українки. Коротко про цей день. Перший фронт, бої там, де найбільш гаряче. Напрямки Покровський, Курахівський, Краматорський, Лиманський, Времівський, Куп'янський. Сьогодні, як і завжди, був на зв'язку з військовими, провів окрему нараду з Міністерством оборони, зокрема щодо комплектування наших бригад. Ми робимо все, щоб зміцнити воїнів і щоб дати Україні більше міцності в боях. Я дякую кожному в світі, хто нам допомагає. Дякую всім лідерам, які дійсно тримають слово і виконують те, про що ми домовлялись. Всі пакети постачання зброї та снарядів для України зараз надзвичайно важливі. Цей час визначає весь рік і в боях, і в тренуванні, і в забезпеченні. Будь-яка затримка зараз по зброї, чи по снарядах, чи по комплектуванню наших бригад коштуватиме надто дорого для усіх в світі, хто дійсно хоче захисту від Росії. І я дякую кожній нашій бойовій бригаді, усім, хто б'ється на передовій, б'ється результативно та хоробро, не здаючи позицій. Дякую за те, що ви є у України. Також сьогодні, вже за результатами перших днів тижня, заслуговують нашої з вами особливої вдячності воїни 55-ї окремої артилерійської бригади «Запорізька Січ». Молодці, хлопці. Ваша влучність незмінно надихає. Друге за сьогодні – міжнародні перемовини. Продовжуємо наш марафон підготовки першого глобального саміту миру. Саміту, який може і повинен показати, чого варта міжнародна співпраця та усі слова про захист статуту ООН та міжнародного порядку, заснованого на правилах. Слова, які звучали протягом років цієї війни. Кожен лідер, який братиме участь в саміті, кожен лідер, який зараз допомагає із організацією саміту, кожна держава, чию силу ми зараз додаємо до спільної сили захисту людського життя, однозначно проявить себе у цьому марафоні, у підготовці саміту миру. Сьогодні я говорив з лідерами Іспанії, Бельгії, Латвії, Фінляндії та Кабо-Верде. Крок за кроком ми вийдемо на дійсно глобальну спільноту. Кожен континент буде представлений на нашому саміті в Швейцарії. Різні нації, і географічно великі, і географічно менші, і ті, хто вже чітко висловився на підтримку міжнародного права, і ті, хто ще це зробить. Поки в Москві лише лицемірно використовують термін «багатополярність», щоб прикрити свої спроби контролювати життя інших націй, ми створюємо реальний інструмент реальної багатополярності. Ми запрошуємо на саміт миру світову більшість, і саме більшість має сказати своє слово, може наблизити справедливий мир. І ще одне за сьогодні. Готуємо зустрічі та документи, які точно стануть новинами за найближчі тижні, нові візити в Україну наших партнерів, нові безпекові угоди для нашої держави і життя загалом в Європі. Та, звичайно, ми продовжуємо готувати фактичний старт перемовин з Європейським Союзом на червень. З нашого українського боку всі деталі будуть опрацьовані на 100%. Україна виконала свої зобов'язання, і на таку ж активність, результативну активність Україна розраховує з боку партнерів. Дякую всім, хто з Україною, усім, хто підтримує дієво та вчасно, бо це життя, збереження життів. Дякую всім, хто б'ється заради нашої держави і наших людей. І, будь ласка, завжди пам'ятайте усіх тих, хто своє життя віддає у цій битві заради України і людяності. Хай буде світлою та вічною пам'ять кожного нашого воїна, чиє життя було віддане у боях і стало життям всієї нашої держави, нашої України. Слава Україні!
And
Heroam Slava.
And with that, that is the end of the speech from President Volodymyr Zelensky here on day 804 of the war. And that moves us on into our second segment, where we get to talk about anything y'all want to talk about. We get to talk about the Middle East, which I generally want to avoid because it does turn into a blood bowl in the chat, although we try and cover it as best we can. And we can also talk about anything else y'all want. History. We could talk about Germany. We could talk about Poland. Maybe even architecture. Maybe where y'all are from. Maybe a little hood review here and there. You know, the sky's the limit. Anything y'all want to talk about, we can talk about. Of course, as long as it's not relating to domestic political issues. But with that, Matthew, we have loads and loads and loads of things to talk about and have a lot of fun with. And Matthew, what do we got?
All right, so we do have a lot to go over. Real quick, though, I saw Nick Warawa say in the live chat, he said Zelensky didn't mention anything about the assassination attempt. I noticed that as well. Zelensky is cold-blooded. He's basically like saying, missed me. Blyat, I'm moving on. It's like Zelensky wasn't even fazed, apparently, by that assassination attempt. He just had the colonels arrested, and that was the end of it. So apparently it didn't bother him that bad, or if he did, he's being pretty stone-faced about it. So with that, we're moving into our poll question here, and it says, if the USA could only afford to support one ally or region, which one would be the most important militarily? And first off, I do want to say that they're all important. I saw people going berserk about that in the chat, but the point is, if the USA were in a war or some wartime scenario and they could only really support one ally or region really strongly, which one is the one you would choose? 60% said Ukraine/Baltic states, while 18% said Taiwan/Asian region allies, and 11% said Israel/Middle Eastern allies. And on this one, I would have to say I'm probably going with Ukraine and the Baltic states, followed up by Taiwan and the Asian region. But that's just me. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would have to say that Ukraine and the Baltic regions are certainly incredibly important going forward into the future to be supported. If we can only support one, we can support them all in reality. It's just that you do want to make sure to partition resources where they're needed the most, even if you can support everyone. So I would say that Ukraine and the Baltics are the most important ones at the moment. Then, of course, second would be Taiwan, and third would be Israel coming in last. Really, the poll reflected exactly how I felt about sending support to different areas of the world. Ukraine is the top priority at the moment, but then there are other places that end up being on the priority scale as well, just a little bit further down. Also, really quickly, let's see here. I want to make sure, let's see here. Hang on. I want to make sure to see where, okay, so yeah, I am right. Okay, so I just want y'all to know this, because this is something that I saw someone say in the chat. They were like, Zionism is the belief that the Jews were supposed to own Israel forever. And not quite. Because there actually was a lot of debate as to where the Jews would create a state. In the modern day, that is, because a Jewish state or a Jewish kingdom did exist thousands of years ago, but in the modern day, one did not. So they had to figure out where to start from scratch. Some of the areas that were brought up into consideration, some I did not even know. One was actually the island of Cyprus. They thought about that place for a while, and that was brought up during a Zionist Congress in Europe as to where they should go. Another one, y'all are not going to believe this, was Uganda. They were actually planning on creating a Jewish state in Uganda. Another one was also in Australia. And overall, none of them really caught on. There was also one that I heard about in Latin America, but sadly I can't find that one. I believe it was supposed to be somewhere around Argentina, but I cannot find the exact details on that one at the moment. But nevertheless, there were a lot of options floated, but then out of all of them, and also Israel, of course, was always one of them that was in the running, at the end, the Ottomans went, step up, get it while it's hot, land in the middle of the desert. Like, absolutely worthless land. You can buy it at cheap prices. And then they were like, wait a minute, cheap prices? They were like, we could buy a lot of that. And then they were like, hell, let's just do it. And then they started buying up the land, and that's when they got to Tel Aviv. So with that, I hope that does address that well, because a lot of people just don't know. A lot of people don't know. It wasn't like, and that's one other thing that people misunderstand about Zionism, is that it wasn't a specific place on Earth. It was just a place. Like, it could be anywhere. That's why Uganda was an option. And when you think about that, it's like Uganda in the middle of Africa. I mean, it's like completely landlocked. It doesn't even have access to the sea. But that was one of the options. You know, it doesn't even seem like that good of an option, being entirely honest, because it's landlocked. You don't even have access to any major shipping routes or trade routes, for that matter, from there. It does not make any sense. Or Australia, which was already Australia. So it's like, why are you going there? And then also there were other options floated. Kenya was one, pretty close to Uganda. But still, it's just, you know, it's like, what were these places? But they were going through them, and they were actually considering them. So, you know, it's not like, and that's one thing I have to clear up. Zionism is not the concept of a Jewish state in Israel. It was just the concept of a Jewish state. It just so happened by pure luck that the cheapest land to buy in the world, which always ends up usually determining most everything, was the cheapest to buy, it actually ended up being in Israel, where the Jews are from historically. So then they ended up buying up the land there and, you know, just hanging out and having a fun time. So, well, not a fun time, but they're having a time. And so with that, I hope that does address that fairly well, at least from what I know historically, because I remember that was a thing, and I was like, wait a minute, what? They didn't want to go to Israel, like, primarily? But anyways, with that, I hope that does address that the best I can. We're about to have some more violence happen in the live chat because of that, from some group or another. You know it, Matthew. Like, you know it, I know it. Keep an eye out.
Raw violence. That man, we're turning this into like the Rumble Dome up in here. I'm telling you what.
Man, I can actually, like, oh my lord, I can bring that up. Like, I can just say Israel and Palestine, and someone's going to come in here and say, kill him. It's just going to be something like that. It's like, hey, calm down. It's like, don't be crazy. But anyways, with that, I hope that does address that the best I can. And with that, Matthew, take it away.
All right. So with that, we're fresh out of polls and fresh out of yapping. So we're moving right to our super chat questions. And the first one of the night is going to go to Jose Garcia, who put in a $100 donation. And thank you very much, Jose, for that support. And Jose, you know, something I just realized, we did not have a question segment during the news tonight. This is the first time we're getting to the questions. And Jose, thank you very much for that $100 support. He said, Operation Stormwatch situation. He says RFU channels are under heavy attack, YouTube censorship, and the mission is protect the LSA and the allies, and execution is raise awareness on censorship and coordinate efforts and amplify the call to action. And he says stand with the RFU.
And I thank you so much for the massive support, Jose Garcia. Your third super chat ever in helping this channel to keep on running. And usually that is a concern that we have to deal with on this channel, is that here and there we do come under bot attacks. But usually there's nothing that YouTube can get you for if you follow the guidelines to the best of your abilities. From what I understand, there's some things that are going on there that may be of a little question, and what was I brought this up in the past about that situation because I don't know the situation, but usually YouTube doesn't go after you for nothing. Usually, like you know, some people believe they do. YouTube always goes after you if you violate something in the guidelines. It may seem mundane, whatever you violated, but that's usually how they get you. It has to be some kind of an actual rules violation on the platform. And back in the day, from what I've heard, and I've never really looked into the situation a lot, it was said that it was because there was there was like 19 different channels in 19 different languages that this particular person was running. And this is how I kind of like deduced everything because no one really gave me the whole story. Like there was like 18 different channels running the same video in 18 different languages, which technically on YouTube that would probably fall under duplicate content. I
will say, Enforcer, real quick on that. I did do some brief research, and it appears that the translation channels are okay from what I could tell. And I think that fellow might have fallen under that exception to it because I think they had reinstated some of them or something like that. So I think it's one of those exceptions to the rule.
Oh, okay, because the way I'd understood it, it was that the same videos just got re-uploaded with different translations, which technically would be a violation of the duplicate content rule on YouTube, where you just take the same videos and upload them over and over and over and just switch the language, which is something you technically cannot do on YouTube. And funnily enough, what's crazy about that, and I know a lot of people are going to be like, you don't know that. I know that because on our YouTube dashboard, Matthew can back me up, YouTube put a video on their YouTube channel on YouTube about duplicate content, what it is, and how to avoid it. And I actually watched that today, and it literally described that very thing, just re-uploading your same video. Like, let's say we ran this live stream here on this channel. I just went and downloaded the file, opened up 5 new channels, and then re-uploaded it everywhere and turned the AdSense on. That would be a violation of the duplicate content rule. But based on what Matthew said, it sounds like those are fine. And I gotta say, if that is the case, because so far I've been understanding it differently because I just don't look into it much. But if that is the case, that is concerning to hear that the guy is under attack. And there have been a decent amount of YouTube channels that have come under attack in the past from pro-Russians and things like that. It sounds like he's the one getting the brunt of it at the moment, which is terrible to hear. And hopefully it can be overcome. His community is incredibly big. I mean, it's actually a really big one. So I'm sure that they can all help out the best they can. But hopefully this channel's community can help insulate this one and protect us from any future things that may go awry just from pro-Russians or just random chaos on the internet. But usually we do well enough following the YouTube community guidelines. It's really hard for anyone to try and report us on a technicality because we...
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, no. Go ahead. I was rounding out my my statement there anyways.
I was about to say, like, I looked yesterday, and surprisingly, we actually share a pretty good number of viewers with that fella's channel. Like, a lot of people get recommended our videos or his videos, and people jump in between the both of them. So we actually share quite a big audience with that fella.
That's really cool. And of course, I'll say that guy in particular has been a staple for an incredibly long time in the Ukraine war world, about as long as we have been. I'm not really sure if he came around at the same time as us, because we were literally in hour one of the war, or whether it was after us. I'm not entirely sure, but he has been around for a pretty good while, and I hate to hear that that's happening to the guy. I mean, we've never had any experiences at all with that fella, good or bad, to be able to talk about him as a YouTuber, but still, hopefully things continue to be on the up and up for the guy, because it does sound like things are going a little bit bad. Also, really quickly, I would want to correct the misstatements, because from what I had heard, which sounds like it's untrue now, I was hearing that it was a duplicate content issue and they were getting him on a technicality, which, while it's a technicality and that's stupid and kind of sucks sometimes, it's still a YouTube rule, and you agree to the rules when you sign up. But now I understand that's not even the case at all, from what people are saying, like Matthew's saying. So thank you for clarifying that, Matthew, and thank you so much for bringing that to our attention, Jose Garcia. And thank you for the massive support and helping this channel to keep running as well, because folks like you do make this thing possible, and if it wasn't for folks like you, we wouldn't be able to stay on air and keep this thing rolling. And so with that, thank you so much once again. I hope that does address that well. And with that, we are on to the next one.
All right. And also, Jose said, thanks for addressing this. I watched that channel. It's top notch, just like yours. Want to raise awareness for the LSA. And yes, indeed, Jose. That fella, along with a handful of others, are pretty much up there at the same level that we're at this point. I'm not trying to brag. I'm just saying what statistics say. So I'm very proud to see that the good reporting channels are basically rising to the top and leaving the crappy ones at the bottom, because there are some crappy ones out there, and y'all know who we're talking about. And they've sort of like sifted their way down to the bottom and sort of fizzling out. Including some hot dog sellers and things like that. They're sort of like fizzling out a little bit. But anyways, it all ends up in the wash, just right. But we're moving on to our next super chat here. And this one goes to BC Skyman, who puts in a $62 donation. And thank you very much, BC, for the very generous support. And I did not see a comment attached to any of... What was that?
Oh, it was a sneeze. Don't worry. It's good.
So you sound like something crazy happening, but thank you very much, BC, for that support. I did not see a comment attached, but I did see a super sticker attached to it, and thank you very much for that. And Enforcer, what say you?
And I would have to say thank you for the massive support, BC Skyman, in helping this channel to keep running. You are a channel legend, and help this thing to keep running, help it to be possible. And I can't thank you enough for being here with us again tonight, and once again helping to keep the flag of the Lee Spring Army flying high, and making sure that the world knows who we are and what we do. It's a big part of well, it's not really a big part of running this channel, but it's still an integral part in running this channel, is continuing to get to do this 6 days a week, and really 7 days a week, optimistically, with YouTube short videos. And I gotta thank you so much once again, BC Skyman, for always backing this channel and helping us keep this thing rolling, because if it wasn't for folks like you, we wouldn't be able to be here covering this news right now. And so thank you so much once again. I hope that does address that the best I can, and we are on to the next one.
And our next one goes to Raynor Slava Ukraine, who puts in a $55 donation. And thank you very much. Yeah, he's a legend for sure. And thank you very much, Raynor, for that very generous support. He said, I respect the channel a lot, and thanks for all you do for Ukraine. It means a lot to me as an American Ukrainian. He says, Slav Ukraine. And a shout out to Surprise, it's us. And thanks, Matt and Andrew. And thank you, Raynor.
And thank you so much, Rainer Slava Ukraini. And also, that is incredibly cool. You are an old guard through and through, just like BC Skyman, have been here forever. Also, Jose Garcia is an incredibly old guard as well. A lot of them have been around for ages, like since the dawn of the channel. And you're one of those people, Raynor. And I got to thank you so much for respecting this channel and helping it to keep rolling. Because you help us to make it possible for us to do everything we do for Ukraine, like our merch sales, giving 10% of the profits to United 24, which we will have to do soon for the mugs, and we'll of course be putting out the receipts and all that stuff really soon for that. Also, everything else we do, the fundraisers, keeping the news up, keeping people engaged in it, which is something that actually, crazily enough, Matthew was touching on just a moment ago, because usually my attention, because every month I do like this And I do this monthly general review of the Ukraine war world, which is usually just me checking up on people who have done not so great things to us as we've run this channel and seeing how they're doing. And Matthew and me have noticed, and the analytics are showing, that almost all of them are now in downward trends. Not really from any of our doing, it's just, I guess, I don't know, people got tired of them, and so most of them are on downward trends in subscribership, viewership, everything else in between. And then other channels, like RFU, which Jose Garcia was talking about a bit ago, are actually on the up and up, just like we are. And we're actually one of the channels that statistically is climbing. And it's crazy to think that we are, because for the longest time, it seemed as though we were never going to get above 160,000 subscribers again. And now we're at a 211,000. We're about to get up to 212,000 here really soon. And that is absolutely crazy to me that we've been on this journey for so long. And Raynor, you've been around for a long time of it, 2 years at least. And you're still here with us and still helping this channel to keep on running. So that way we can keep on doing the amazing things we're doing, keeping morale high, keeping spirits up. And that's another thing I've noticed, is that a lot of the people who are kind of on the down and out right now, and some of them are actually out. Like, some of them look like they've actually legitimately quit, or they're about to quit. A lot of those people, interestingly enough, have started to not really sound positive about the war. Well, they've never been positive about the war. Most of these people encourage the crying fest, making everyone feel bad for something they can't control. But what's interesting about it is that they're also going down and out at the same time. They're starting to change their message about Ukraine, and instead of saying, oh, it's, it's going, things are going a little tough. Like sometimes we said on this channel, things are going tough, but it'll get better. Instead, there's like, things are getting tough and it's over. It's just so, you know what I'm talking about, Matthew? They're like, it's so freaking over. They just lost it now. We're all watching the end, and then it's like, why would you say that? And then, today that was proven wrong as the Ukrainians stabilized the line again. So with that,
and it's like the people know it's wrong too, because it's like common sense tells you that if Ukraine is having a problem because they're having an ammo shortage, and that is the main reason why they're having a problem. I don't want to hear that crap from the other analysts talking about it's because Ukraine has made stupid decisions. It's like everybody makes mistakes. Ukraine has made mistakes, but obviously if you're out of shells, that's going to prevent you from moving forward. It's also going to prevent you from even defending your territory, and that's just common sense. So now that the U.S. is sending more aid, naturally, when it starts arriving, Ukraine is going to turn the situation around. But yet you'll have some channels out there that sort of like flip their tune a little bit on Ukraine when things start going a little bit sideways. They're like, oh, Ukraine's finished. It's done. It's like, come on now. It's like the aid will be there shortly. They'll turn it around, and we're seeing that happening even today. And it just goes to show you they're not reliable channels. They're not good analysts. And it really shows their lack of experience, to be honest.
And also another thing that is also a critique of mine on the channels that are on the down and out, none of them have an original thought. Every single thought that they say that they try and make sound like their own, they get from other people. Like, they'll literally just like read a quote from like a news article, and then they'll act like that's their idea and they'll run with it, although it makes no sense when you analyze it any further. Like for example, when people say that the war is over for Ukraine and they've lost, and then they just run with that. It's like, you didn't even explain why. You're just saying, oh, so-and-so said it's over. It's like, why did they say it's over? They didn't even explain that. They just come out, pull something out of their ass and say it's over, so it's over? It's like, that's not how this works. Like, that's not how it works. And it never will be either, because when we talk about it, I hope I give enough analysis to explain why it's not over, and why the Ukrainians still have a fighting chance and doing incredibly well and even winning. That's something that I feel like we try and go over fairly well on this channel. Like, the supply side of things, the training side, the numbers side, that kind of stuff, the amount of losses the Russians are taking, their numbers, what's going to lead them to coming up, really culminating to a head to where they'll pretty much be forced out of the war due to some internal issues. I feel like we really do that the best we can, trying to explain that, because if you call yourself a military analyst on YouTube, you should be able to explain that logically, because if you can't, are you just saying crap and saying you're an analyst? Because if you're not analyzing to come up to your conclusions, you're not an analyst, you're just some idiot who's saying things, and it doesn't mean anything. That's not good analyzing, that's just saying crap to say it. So that's my opinion on that. I like to see though that people may be catching on to that, maybe getting tired of that, and they actually want to hear a little bit of analysis instead. And a lot of people are thinking that we may just be stroking our own egos, and that's not true, because sometimes we do fall short on analysis. Everyone does. But there are many other channels out there nowadays who are starting to rise to the top that are really good and really do a lot of analysis, like RFU, which is one of those channels that does a really good amount of analysis, like Jose Garcia was saying. And so it's good to see that people are starting to gravitate more towards heavier analysis side things instead of just people repeating major headlines and trying to get clicks off of that. And so with that, thank you so much once again for enjoying how we run this channel. Radar Slava Ukraine. Slava Ukraine. I don't know why I want to say Slava Ukraine, but still, thank you so much for enjoying this channel. Also, really cool to know that you're a Ukrainian American, and of course, Slava Ukraini. And a huge shout out to Surprise It's Us as well. Surprise It's Us has been here forever. I'm not even kidding. Forever. Since day 4 minimum. An old guard as well. And we always thank the old guards for sticking with us through the entire course. And so with that, thank you so much once again. Thank you greatly, Raynor, for your kind words and really enjoying what we do and supporting it to help us to make this thing possible. And with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, and our next one is going to go to Donna Olson, who puts in a $50 donation. Thank you very much, Donna.
Happy birthday!
That very generous support. And Donna says, today is Donna Olson's birthday, and take a question from the chat. And a huge birthday shout out to Donna Olson, the longtime channel legend. I hope you've had a good birthday today, because it is now nighttime, so that means the birthday is coming to an end. So I hope it was a good one today, and a huge happy birthday from the Cult of Matt. And Enforcer, what say you?
And a huge happy birthday to you, Donna Olson. Another channel legend. Been here for ages. And I gotta say, happy birthday to you, Donna Olson, all the way from 9120 Beverly Hills. And I hope that you're having an amazing one. It's gotta be a fun one, of course, in the Beverly Hills of all places. I mean, that's gotta be incredibly fun. And I gotta say that it is so cool to know that you're here with us tonight on your birthday. I hope you had a great one. I hope everyone in the live chat wishes Donna Olson a happy birthday, because she has been here forever and is one of the biggest supporters of the Lee Spring Army. We thank her greatly for being here tonight, and I gotta wish you a happy birthday and a happy new year. Why not? Like, why the hell not? Why not make it sound like a Merry Christmas thing? But still,
It's not even a new year, but happy new year.
yeah, why the hell not? Just happy new year to you. Also, wait a minute, that's that. Okay, never mind. I was curious there, but anyways,
Hey,
still,
they have that in GTA, by the way.
I know, but it's so much closer to like the downtown than it is here. Like, this is all the way out. Like, look how far away that is. Like, that's way out there.
That's crazy, man.
That's
Los
crazy.
Angeles is a much bigger place than they show it on GTA 5, I'm telling you.
Absolutely.
We'll have World War III before we have GTA 6, I'm just telling you right now.
I'm telling you that. I think everyone will be dead. I think it'll be Fallout, the TV series, before like GTA 6 comes out. I'm serious about that. I believe it. But beyond that, thank you so much once again for the support, Donna Olson. I wish you a happy birthday. I hope that the entirety of the Lee Spring Army has been able to wish you an incredible happy birthday, and many more to come. And so with that, thank you so much once again. I hope that does address that well. And with that, we are on to the next one.
In our next super chat goes to another channel legend. This time it's Sylvester the Cat, who puts in a $40 donation. And a huge shout out to Sylvester for that support. He said, hello, Matt and Enforcer. He said, exactly what are you looking at that tells you the Russians will run out of armored vehicles at the end of the year? And I want to find the source material to show someone. And thanks from a Lee Spring tanker.
And thank you so much for the support. And that is a great question. Sadly, I don't have those markers on this map. I believe they're on the map from 2 weeks ago, but we actually had someone who was on Twitter who looked at a load. I don't know how they got access to them, but they looked at a load of satellite pictures of different Russian supply yards from, I believe it was March of 2024, and then 6 months before that in October of 2023, and had compared the numbers of visible armored vehicles in October of 2023 compared to March of 2024, and subtracted the number that then existed in March, and then came up with a rate of consumption that the Russian army is going through because of losses and attrition in Ukraine. And when it came out to the numbers of how many armored vehicles were visibly left to be able to be converted into usable vehicles versus the amount that they lost over 6 months, the number came out to be around 10 and a half to, I believe it was 13 months of armored vehicles left at the current rate of consumption that they would have until they ran out. And that was in March. So going off of that, they are going to run out of armored vehicles sometime by December or February, but sadly I do not have that marker in front of me, and I don't know the exact map that was on. But I could attest, because I looked at it a good bit, that it was accurate analysis from what I could tell without doing all the number crunching myself. It looked to be backed up, at least on a visual end of looking at the supply yard 6 months before, and then right then at that moment, they had been thoroughly cleared out, and looked to be running out of armor in a lot of categories, not even just armor, but SPGs and things like that. So going off of that, we do know that that number was fairly accurate, and that's why we believe that they will start to run into critical armor shortages by the later end of this year or in the very, very early part of next year. And that will probably lead to a critical moment in the war where they either have to decide to continue on the war without really any armor support, which is a major offensive weapon, as you would know as a tanker, or they will have to pretty much back out of the war due to a lack of an actual fieldable offensive army. So with that, I hope that does address that the best I can, and thank you so much for the incredible support in asking that question, because analysis is really important, and that would be my answer to it. So if you want to go back through the past several weeks of live streams, you will be able to probably find the map, and I will tell you to look for a marker that is off in the middle, I think, of Tyumen and Krasnoyarsk. I think it's somewhere in there inside of Russia where we put the marker. It's really just in eastern Russia, like look in eastern Russia on each week's map, and you will eventually find the one with the chart in it, but that's why we know the losses will culminate to a head near the end of this year. And so with that, I thank you so much once again for the support. I hope that does address that well, and we are on to the next one.
All right, and real quick, we forgot to grab the live chat question for Donna Olson Super Chat,
Dang.
so we're going back to that one. This one goes to Dean, who says, considering the attempt on Zelensky's life, do you think the smart move is for him to leave the country for at least, let's say, a week to mop up any possible remnants of that plan?
I would say no. It's never a good idea for a leader to leave their country, even in dangerous times. So I would be against that, because if he left, what is that showing the Ukrainian public? That he's scared of dying? Why in the world would soldiers die on the front line for a leader that would be scared to possibly risk dying himself? I would say that that would be a bad signal to send forward to everyone in Ukraine. So I believe that he should not leave. He should stay. It will be dangerous, sure, and his life is always in danger, to be honest. If he left Ukraine, he might even be in more danger, because you don't have the entire state apparatus that you could possibly use as insulation. So I would say it'd probably be better for him to stay, in my opinion. So with that, I hope that does answer that well, and thank you so much for sponsoring that live chat, Donna Olson. We're sorry we missed that. And with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, and our next one is going to go to Kevin, who puts in a $20 donation. Thank you very much, Kevin, for that support of the channel. He says, are the Russians on the verge of desperation? Oh, they've been there for a good minute. Then Kevin says, refinery strikes and such. Could that desperation push them into making irrational decisions like tactical nuke strikes?
I don't think they'll ever conduct a tactical nuke strike in Ukraine. Because if that moment would have happened, it's passed at least twice. During the Kharkiv counteroffensive of 2022 and the Kherson counteroffensive of 2022, those would have been moments that the Ukrainian army was advancing so rapidly that the deployment of tactical nuclear weapons would have been advisable in a situation like that if they were to use them. But they did not. And I don't think even at this point in the war, there will ever be an actual use by the Russian Federation of nuclear weapons inside of Ukraine, simply for the reason that it doesn't fulfill the needs of their doctrine. The needs in the doctrine of the Russian Federation is that it has to be a strike done in a defensive means, meaning that the state of the Russian Federation has to be in some sort of an existential crisis or peril directly threatening the existence of the country for them to be able to use that. And of course, you can stretch those words to really apply to any situation, like if they're losing the war in Ukraine, that could be an existential threat to the state. But that would be really hard to push, because everyone has understood, even in the Soviet Union, that that doctrine means that it is a shoot second doctrine, meaning that someone would have to fire a nuclear weapon at them for them to fire back, or they would have to be in such a bad situation that for the Russians, from a Russian perspective, enemy forces are rapidly advancing into Russia, and the Russian government will cease to exist if they do not act now. those are the kinds of instances that the Russian nuclear doctrine still emphasizes to this day. So it would be really hard for them to use a tactical nuclear weapon in Ukraine and justify it based off their current doctrine. And a lot of people are going to say, doctrine, to hell with the doctrine, they can do whatever they want. But doctrine has a lot of meaning. It's what people follow. It's like the general guideline. You can't just say, nah, scratch up the doctrine, we're just going to nuke them anyways. Because even North Korea, as wild a country as they are, last year actually it was, they changed their nuclear doctrine from a defensive shoot second doctrine to a preemptive shoot first doctrine. They're the only country in the world that actually has one. And that was a huge change and actually made everything in the region a lot more dangerous, because now, instead of the North Koreans saying, okay, if we're in like a precarious situation and things are going badly, we'll nuke them. Now they say, listen, if they just piss us off enough and we think that the situation looks dangerous enough, we'll just start nuking people first. That's their doctrine that they're going off of. And that's a much more dangerous one to work off of. And even then, with Kim Jong-un being the supreme leader of North Korea and getting to really do whatever he wants at the end of the day, even they found it necessary to officially change the nuclear doctrine to make it seem more justifiable for what they may do in the future. So with that, I hope that does address that well. And thank you so much for the support, Kevin, in helping this channel to keep on running, because folks like you help to make this thing possible. And so with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, and our next one is going to go to Blue Flam 777 LSA, who puts in a $20 donation. Thank you very much, Blue Flam, for your support as well. And he has a spicy joke here. I'm trying to proofread it in my head real quick to see if it's good to go. Let's see here. He said, "A hot dog boy's mama is so nasty that she went swimming and made the Dead Sea."
Oh my god! Oh my god!
All right, he also said, wait a minute, hold on, let me reread this one. He said his cousin's mama's YouTube channel is so dirty, she has to wipe her feet before she goes outside.
Oh my god!
Emotional damage.
Emotional damage. Oh my god!
Question to the chat. Slow Ukraini.
Dude, those were
recover from that one.
Dude, those were worse than that one that I said to that bot at the beginning when they're like, "You need a father figure," and then I said, "Well, why the?" Oh my lord! That goodness. Blue Flam.
Damn, that was brutal.
Blue Flam woke up and chose violence today. He said, "People are going to die." He's like, "Oh my lord!" Kill them with words. And I gotta say, Blue Flame 777. That is nuts right there. Oh my lord. That is, oh my goodness. Everyone in the chat's going crazy. They're like, "Oh my god." That was nuts. I don't even know how to respond to that. That is crazy right there. Stop. Stop. He's dead already. But still, thank you so much for the support. Thank you for throwing in some of the harshest burns I have ever heard. Those are even more harsh than the burns that liquidators received at the Chernobyl nuclear site. And I gotta thank you for the support and helping this channel to keep on running. And you know it, Blue Flam. We will get a live chat in your honor, in honor of those burns. And so with that, what do we got, Matthew?
All right, so this question is gonna go to, let's see here. Let me see. I'm looking for the one that's going to fit our context the best. It looks like Andy L. He said, "I wonder if the U.S. military strategists are in Ukraine yet, because they were a line item in the approved spending package."
They may possibly be in Ukraine by this point. I believe they are, because it's not that hard to transport personnel. Just put them on a plane and send them over, and that's something we do every day. So I'd have a feeling that they're in there. It's just that we don't really talk about it much or publicly state that, because we don't want them to possibly be targets of, you know, people who would not want the United States in Ukraine. The Russians, maybe some Ukrainians working with the Russians, people like that. So we probably keep that on the down low. But with that, I hope that does address that live chat fairly well. Thank you so much, Blue Flame 777, for being an absolute G and sponsoring that live chat and also putting in those sick burns. And with that, we are on to the next one.
In our next one goes to Andy L. He put in a super chat as well, and this is a $20 donation. And thank you very much, Andy, for that support. He says, "World War II allies bombed Axis cities with no smart bombs, and Israel is actually using smart bombs to try to protect against civilian casualties. And it's called war, and you want a sterilized war. Surrender."
And I thank you for the support, Andy L. And that is true. But one thing I will say about the Israelis, in all fairness, of course, being, pro-Western, therefore pro-Israeli myself, the Israelis do have a bit of a tendency, because they removed the knocking system from their bombings, so they don't warn anyone inside these buildings if there is a bomb on the way. They just bomb them, and that has led to civilian casualties occurring, which is, of course, is something you are supposed to avoid in war. But at the same time, it's a little bit of a tough one, because if they use the knocking system, which they had before, they most likely believe that Hamas would move the stuff out. And also another thing is about this is that it's a really tough thing to talk about, because Maddie, maybe you would want to try and talk about it for a second, because I'm trying to collect some good words here to say about this. So, do you have?
And what's the topic again? What was the question?
The Israelis bombing the Strip versus how the United States, how the Allies bombed German cities in World War II.
Me personally, if the question is, should we bomb the Gaza Strip like that, like in World War II, I would say no, because by doing that, you really cannot pick and choose who you're taking out and eliminating, and basically the other way around. So to me, I would say that unless the strikes can be done in a precision way, which was, to my knowledge, not really done in World War II, then it probably wouldn't be a good idea. Honestly, the best way, in my opinion, to go in there and try to take the Hamas leaders out in Gaza would be to send in the troops like Israel's doing. Send them in a way that's very precise. Send them exactly where the Hamas people are. Take them out and try to avoid the civilians along the way. And the civilians will have to use their common sense as well. They'll have to simply get out of the way. Israel has let people know by dropping pamphlets down the ground that they need to leave the certain areas because they're going in there. So to me, to answer the question again, I would say probably don't bomb it like World War II. But that's just me. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would have to say that, in my opinion, getting back to this, the United States bombed largely, really the Allies bombed indiscriminately for the large part in World War II, because that was really the only way to get bombers through. We did have a way to precisely bomb targets within 50 feet of the actual target. The problem was that a singular bomber flying into German airspace wouldn't have made it. So then we decided we had to lop them all into a large Army Air Force, and then because of that, why not just drop bombs on the entire city and knock everything out? And so that was kind of the premise then. But nowadays, with the Israelis using precision-guided weapons, I do have to say that the amount of casualties that we do understand that they've inflicted on civilians has been rather high. And now, I will say this, though. We cannot take Palestinian or Hamas numbers because we know that those are heavily inflated for propaganda reasons. Like, I believe it was just 4 days into the airstrikes that were happening, and they said, "Oh my God, the Israelis, they've killed 50,000 people." Not wounded and killed, just killed. And it's like, there's no way in hell that happened. Like, I'm not believing that. That's just an unbelievable number. Because they didn't even have that many airstrikes happening to be able to just wipe out 50,000 people killed. And who knows how many people would be wounded on top of that. I mean, hell, at that kind of a number, at 50,000 killed, you would have at least 150,000 to 200,000 wounded, which would completely overload every single hospital in the Gaza Strip all at one time. And not only that, there would just be loads of wounded people just sitting around the outside of hospitals, which you just did not see. So those numbers were way off. I would assume, though, that the numbers are at least, at this point, certainly in the thousands, maybe even in the low 10,000s. And as far as modern war goes, that is something that generally has to be avoided at all costs. Trying to inflict, accidentally or collateral civilian casualties generally have to be avoided. But the problem with that at the same time is that sometimes Hamas forces these civilians to stay where they are, so that way they can use them as shields. So then they end up having to inevitably be collateral, or they end up choosing to stay there. And that's something that a lot of people don't know, is that in the Gaza Strip, a lot of Gazans believe that it's a great thing to be a martyr for the cause. So they will actively get in the way of an Israeli strike or be in the way, so that way if they die, they get martyred for the cause and they look like a bunch of innocent people, when in reality they deliberately stayed somewhere where it was inevitably going to be stricken, which is something that a lot of people don't talk about, but it is something that happens from time to time in the Strip. And so that ends up creating inevitable casualties, which become an issue of their own, because civilian casualties should be avoided, but if collateral is happening because these people are either putting themselves in danger or they're being forced to remain in harm's way, there really is no way around that. So I would have to be quite honest. It's a tough thing to really come to a conclusion on, because it's terrible. I mean, it's terrible to have civilian casualties no matter what the situation is. Because, after seeing 2 years of war, and myself personally having seen a lot of pictures of the aftermath of civilian casualties, it is horrendous to see innocents getting killed. It is a terrible thing, but when it becomes something that is unavoidable, I guess it's just an unfortunate reality of the situation. But still something I would say that needs to be avoided at all costs, and only done if deemed absolutely necessary for a situation by situation basis. But with that, I hope that does address that the best I can, Andy L. It is a really tough thing to negotiate because, of course, I'm pro-Western, and for that reason, I automatically align with the Israelis. But civilian casualties have to be avoided as best as possible. And a lot of people are going to say, well, America didn't avoid civilian casualties in Iraq and Afghanistan. We tried our best. Like, when those civilian casualties happen, they happen because we had exhausted all other options. Usually, we tried our best to avoid them, though. So, that's what I can put out there. We tried. They will happen, but we should be trying to minimize them as best we can. And so with that, I hope that does address that well. And I thank you so much once again for support, Andy L, and being an absolute legend of the channel. And with that, we are on to the next one. And thank you once again.
All right, and our next question here is going to go to the Badger Bro, who puts in a $20 donation. And he says, Enforcer, I believe Egypt, Jordan, Lebanon had accepted refugees from Palestine before, but they had caused havoc/riots in those countries, and they deported them back to Palestine and the USA, and USA is the only country allowing them in.
That is largely true. That actually sounds a little wild, but that is largely true, especially with Lebanon. Lebanon's modern politics, and this is actually a political realm I will talk about briefly because it's an interesting one. Lebanon's modern politics are actually shaped because of the Palestinian refugees that were allowed into Lebanon. Because at the end of the Arab-Israeli War, which Lebanon, I believe, was a part of at the time, and let me make sure to get that correct, Arab-Israeli War. Let me see here. Let me check. I need to make sure to check this. The belligerents. So, Lebanon was a belligerent in that conflict. And let's see here. Who was their commander? So, actually, it appears... Hang on. Let me actually check this. So... Yeah, Lebanon wasn't really actively involved in the conflict. They only had 436 soldiers dedicated, which is less than a battalion. It's only 4 companies through the entire war, so that's really nothing. And I'll have to look into Lebanon's direct involvement in the conflict at the time. But at the end of the war, one thing I do know, and this is something I can talk about a little bit, is that when the Israelis took a large amount of the land that was actually supposed to be Palestine's in the UN partition plan in the north and also in other areas, millions of Palestinians ended up moving into the West Bank, Gaza, and specifically into Lebanon. And because of this, and because of the Lebanese, well, not the Lebanese, but the Palestinians bringing their extremely special flavor of, I guess you could say, really anti-Semitism, I guess is the best way to explain it in the end, with them into Lebanon, they actually ended up shaping the modern political field in Lebanon to this day. They're actually the ones who live within the area of southern Lebanon, and those Palestinian refugees actually eventually birthed Hezbollah. That's what they're from. Because many people will be wondering, how in the world, like where did all those... where did all these people who are extremist Islamics come from in southern Lebanon, and why aren't they in northern Lebanon? That's because they all actually came from Israel, and they're actually Palestinian refugees that ended up moving into Lebanon and then just staying there in the south. That's what ended up creating the Lebanese Civil War later on, as this group tried to take control of the country, and they kind of did. And that's why Lebanon is more an Islamic-aligned country now than it was in the past, because in the past, Lebanon was largely, it wasn't entirely so, but it was mostly a Christian Islamic country for the best part. But due to the changes that happened after the Arab-Israeli War, they then started to slowly shift over the next few decades into being almost a majority Islamic country, like they are almost in the modern day. So that's why nowadays nowadays the Lebanese government, a lot like other governments, isn't really a big fan of bringing in Palestinian refugees because they have a fairly good destabilizing factor whenever they move in, a lot like what happened with Lebanon. And that's why, and this is another interesting thing, that's why when y'all run into anyone who may be Middle Eastern and you ask them, where are you from, they're from Lebanon. And usually they're Orthodox Lebanese, because that group in particular ended up fleeing in the millions, actually, about 2 million of them, which is a decent amount of the country's population, ended up fleeing Lebanon to the United States and Canada after the U.S. involvement in the Lebanese Civil War in the early to mid 80s. So that is a little bit of a history tidbit for y'all on what in the world shaped Lebanon and why in the world they probably will not take Palestinian refugees in the modern day. And that's really why no one else will either. Because if y'all noticed, Egypt literally blocked the Palestinians from leaving the Strip. Because when Israel was like, move south, and then a lot of Palestinians were like, well, Gazans were like, where do we go? Where do we go? And they were like, we'll go to Egypt. And then Egypt literally brought the military out to the border and was like, no, he's like, you're not coming in here. And then also Jordan was like, we pity them. And then they're like, take us. And they're like, hell no, y'all are not coming to Jordan. So with that, I hope that does address that fairly well, at least from my concept of what's happened as far as I understand history in the area or modern history within the region. And I thank you for the support and helping this channel to keep on running. And also I see a lot of people thinking, well, appreciating the history lesson. No problem. It's no big deal. I like doing it. And also, there's an interesting history with the Egyptian involvement in really spurning a lot of the first terror groups that would actually be seen within Palestine. Which is a very interesting thing as well, but that's a whole rabbit hole for another time. But still, thank you so much once again. I hope that does address that the best I can. And with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, and our next one is going to go to Jay Bagwell, the channel legend, and he puts in a $20 donation. It's good to see you once again, Jay, and thank you very much for that support. He says, congrats on the continued success of the channel, and you guys run circles around the competition, in my opinion, he says. And to the haters, we aren't going anywhere. And long live the LSA, bitches!
Dang! Oh my lord!
I love it, Jay. I love that.
Oh my lord! Jay Bagwell's getting heated over here, but I gotta say, thank you. Huge thanks.
I gotta say it on air. I'm telling you what,
man. That's one you had to say on air right there, because we know Jay Bagwell in person. I would have loved to have seen Jay Bagwell say that in person. That would have been really fun. But beyond that, thank you so much for the support. Thank you for enjoying that we're still here, Jay Bagwell. We're still here, and we ain't going anywhere. And I know that you're saying that because you ended up getting kind of down in the trenches in some instances. But beyond that, I gotta say, thank you so much once again for the support, and thank you for saying that we run circles around some of the competition. Usually I like to try and be on friendly terms with other folks in the category, but with some of them, I'm perfectly fine with being unfriendly with them. Not that I'm trying to go out of my way to create beef, it's just that they've been unfriendly enough to us, so I could honestly care less. Specifically the hot dog man. And also, we ain't going anywhere. And long live the LSA, bitches! No, but still, thank you so much for the support, Jay Bagwell, and helping this channel to keep on running. Thank you for being an old guard and an absolute legend. And with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, and our next one is going to go to Manchild, who puts in a $20 donation, and he represents the Alabama Battalion of the LSA. He says, never forget, BMP have a little wee-wee. Whoa. He said, I know you won't comment on that, but seriously, love you guys, and the Birmingham LSA.
Why in the world, man, did you read that like a former president? You went, BMP have little wee-wee. I was like, wait a minute, Obama?
If in doubt, send in a drone strike. Remember, people, it's all taken care of.
When you hit them once, you gotta hit them a second time. Or something like that. Double tap them. But anyways, I gotta say, thank you so much for the support. Thank you for repping the city of Birmingham set. Really cool. Actually, funnily enough, y'all wouldn't believe this, but every once in a while when I get free time, I go shooting. And I'm not going to say where I go shooting, but where I go shooting, it turns out I was there just a few days, well, actually about a week or two ago at this point, And I told the story on air when it happened, but I'm going to tell it again because there's actually a lot of LSA in Birmingham, Alabama now, where we're from and where the LSA, well, we're not from Birmingham. We're actually from Montgomery, Alabama, which is further south and is now this state's version of Aleppo. So we do not live there. We have now become refugees and moved further north to Birmingham. But beyond that, we live in Birmingham nowadays, and this is where the LSA HQ, really the capital of the Lee Spring Army, is at. And I was at the range, and I was talking to a range officer because this is really the only range I go to. And so someone who just started working there came up behind the counter, not going to say their name, but they came up behind the counter because they were working there, and they stuck out their hand and they said, "Long live the Lee Spring Army, you're the enforcer. I've been watching your channel for a year." And I was like, "Oh my God." I was like, "You're an actual fan?" And this fellow was like, "Yeah, I've been watching for an entire year." And I was like, "No way." I was like, "When did you start working here?" He's like, "A week ago." So a random chance LSA encounter in the wild, out of the blue. I was completely blown away. And also a huge shout out to the other range officers there. They wanted me to call them the Viking, and I believe I forgot the other name that I was supposed to be shouting out, but the Viking. I know the Viking. And I'll make sure to let the other fella know that I was giving him a shout out as well. But still, really cool. And also really cool to know that the LSA in Birmingham, Alabama in particular is beginning to grow, because we're starting to find out that a lot of people around the city actually know us. And I think that is really, really cool because, you know, who would think that it would actually come back to full circle going from international to being local? And so with that, thank you so much once again for the support. I hope that does address that fairly well. And also, someone said, "Wow, kind of unprofessional though, being starstruck at work." Hey man, I wasn't complaining. I was happy someone recognized me. I was like, no freaking way. I was like, because the thing is that while we have built a fairly big channel with almost 212,000 subscribers, the amount of times we've been recognized in person is fairly low. I think it's even lower for Matthew than it is for me because I'm the one usually out and about. Matthew's the one, he's pretty much sitting here at home working on things in the background. But for me, I think I've run into maybe 5 or 6 people in real life that just out of the blue knew the channel. And then there's maybe another 4, not really, it's more like 3, I think, that know the channel, but they knew it because I have friends that know I run the channel, and then they told their friends, and then they found out about it. But beyond that, I've only met like 7 people in real life that know about this channel. So meeting anyone in real life that knows about the channel, I don't care if it's unprofessional or not, I'm just blown away. Like honestly, it makes my day more than it probably makes theirs for me to meet them. Because I'm like, no freaking way. I'm like, someone actually knows. It's really cool to me. But with that, I hope that does address that well. And I thank you so much once again for support, for repping the Alabama set. And also, I gotta say, those B&Ps do have little wee-wees. And so with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, and our next one here goes to CK Bold, who puts in the 5, and says, take a live chat question. He orders the usual, by the way, and thank you very much, CK Bold, for that support. And this question from the live chat goes to Teza, who says, have you seen reports of a serving U.S. serviceman that was arrested in Russia? And confirmation. And Teza, I did hear about that. I don't think the enforcer heard about it, but I know the details of it. The guy was apparently honey-trapped, or honey-potted, into basically being pulled back to Russia. I think he was a sergeant or something like that. And now Russia has arrested the guy. He's been arrested. I believe the allegation is theft. And we probably know that's probably a made-up allegation. He simply got arrested because he was a soldier, and he was the United States soldier. And now he's in Russian custody, of all places, out of pure stupidity. So, honestly, for that kind of stupidity, I wouldn't be in too big of a rush to get him back, to be perfectly honest with you. But that's just me. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would have to say, stupid decisions that lead to stupid outcomes. The guy was arrested. He was a sergeant, so he probably didn't really have a lot that's sensitive information if they end up interrogating the guy. I'm all for protecting every American, but when you do something that stupid, I don't really think there's a lot of protection that the government can extend. Considering also that the guy, knowing the position he was in the military, ended up getting honeypotted back to Russia. I would be quite honest, I don't really have a lot of sympathy for the guy. So if the guy ends up getting stuck over there, he's not my top priority, in my opinion, that I would be trying to exchange to get out of Russia. In my opinion, he would be on the bottom of the totem pole, or next to the bottom. And so with that, I hope that does address that incredibly well. And speaking of honeypots, Matthew, did you know this is actually a fun fact about the Stasi? Or really the Stasi and the NKVD then turned KGB. During the Cold War, they actually had this sicko tactic. They only did it for a while because they ended up ditching it because it was so unethical and immoral. But they had this sicko tactic for a while where they'd end up getting these women agents. They'd be like, okay, woman agent, you're going to go across the border into Western Europe. You're going to find some officer or something. You're going to build up a romantic relationship with them. You know, and I'm not talking about like the usual sleep with them and then blackmail them kind of a thing that they did later. I'm talking about don't sleep with them. You build up an entire romantic relationship with them. You get married to them and you live with them for years and act like you love them. But the entire time, the only thing you're doing is getting information out of them about what's going on. And then after several years of that, one day you're just going to disappear and you're going to come back and then eventually get reassigned to something else. They did that all the way through the 50s, and it ended up leading to so many Western officers committing suicide after they found out that the Stasi and the KGB, the Stasi was the East German version of the KGB, they both went, oh my God. They're like, we're getting a lot of these people to kill themselves. They're like, you know what, we need to stop this because most of these people are going to end up just never existing again, and we won't be able to get any more information out of them. So they ended up abandoning that concept, but at the beginning of the war, at the beginning of the Cold War, that's what they did. But later on, they redesigned the tactic to be just, you know, get out, do a fling with them and then record the thing or something and then blackmail them with it. And that was the thing that they did later. So
It's super effective, though. Like, out of all the different tactics that people use to try to infiltrate organizations and things like that, honeypotting is by far the most practical when it comes to, like, especially when you have a male involved in it. Obviously, it's much more different. You go send the female in, they basically seduce the male in the leadership position or whatever, and then they can get the information they need. And not necessarily the blackmail thing. Like, that's one option that they do sometimes. But a lot of the times it's simply just making a relationship and then getting information from them in exchange for, you know, certain things and stuff like that. But it's over time, from what I can tell, it's been very effective.
yeah, it seems to be one of the most effective things. But you know, there's other ways that they do it too. Like for example, debt. You know, like they'll come and get you for debt. They'll be like, hey, if you help us out here, we'll pay off your debt. Or better yet, Matthew, when those two Navy guys, remember those two stupid guys in the aircraft carrier who ended up selling off information to the Chinese for $10,000?
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, those goofy idiots. They're, you know, sometimes money is just a motivator. Sometimes it's love. But both times it has to do with money and love. Maybe your wife is a member of the KGB. Maybe your wife is a member of the FSB. Who knows? Maybe even your husband is working for the KGB. You just never know. Maybe you ought to loyalty test him one day. Like, you just never know. But make sure to call your family and let them know in advance. So that way when you find out, you can cry to them. But with that, I hope that does address that well. I thank you so much once again for support, and I hope that I was able to share a small little anecdote from those stories. And also another thing I want to say is that spy work is never like James Bond stuff, like in the movies. It's actually really mundane stuff, really, really boring, but it's made to be interesting because, like, you know, there's some pretty high stakes. If you get caught, you could get arrested, put in prison, you know, maybe even executed in some instances. So it's high stakes, but kind of boring. But anyways, with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, and our next one here goes to Rob Wilkes, who puts in a 5, and thank you very much for that support. He says, I have a small request. He said, I have some English subtitles under the Ukrainian anthem that leads into each broadcast. That would hit the nail on the head, LOL.
Hey, I thank you for the support. And a good question. And also, I would say, possibly we might be able to do that in the future. I will be seeing about trying to do that. But at the moment, our current Ukrainian anthem intro is once again kind of up in the air. We don't really know what the future of it's going to be at the moment. It might have to get switched out. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about that on air, but it might get switched out in the future for certain reasons. But still, with that, thank you so much for the support. I hope that does address that well, and I will see on looking into that and seeing about doing it. And so with that, thank you so much once again, and we are on to the next one.
And our next one goes to Robert Johnson, who puts in a 5 and says, Slava Ukraine. And I have to say, Herom Slava. And thank you, Robert. And Enforcer, what say you?
And Slava Ukraini, Haram Slava, Robert. And thank you so much for the support and helping this channel to keep on running. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And this one goes to Carrie Ann LSA, who puts in a 5. And says, hey guys, doing great as always. And do you think if Russia had produced their walking bunker things, it would be going better for them? And also, by the way, Carrie Ann, I hope Nick's doing well.
And I hope Nick is doing well, too. And I think I asked about that earlier in the stream. Sadly, I don't think I ever saw the response in the live chat, so sorry I missed that. But I hope Nick is doing well, and he's on the up and up and still continuing to improve after that surgery. But beyond that, to answer that question, I don't think the moving bunkers would have helped them out too much. And let me make sure I'm thinking of the right one. Russian moving bunker. And let's see here. Yeah, that is the right one. I don't think this thing would have done well. Let me... 1 second. Tank. Let me go pull this up. Oh my great heavens. If this is the one you're talking about, I don't think that would have worked too well. It's literally the box. It's the Amazon Prime package. Call this thing same-day shipping because you're going to be meeting God the same day you get in this thing. I don't think this thing would have done well at all. And if this is what you're talking about, hell no. But with that, thank you so much for the support, Carrie Ann, and thank you for being a part of the LSA first couple. And I hope they, the couple is still doing well, is strong, and is healthy. And so with that, thank you so much once again for support. I hope that does address that well, and we are on to the next one.
All right, and that next one is going to go to Havlin Tough, who puts in a 5, and says, what did the map look when it was pre-Israel?
Let's see here. Let me go pull up the British-Palestine mandate, and let me go show you all this here. Images. Come on, show me the image. So... this was the Palestine Mandate. This is it. But, well, as it formed, the British created 2 countries out of it. They created Israel, which was over here in modern-day Israel, and then they created Transjordan. I don't know why it was Transjordan. I never really got a good explanation as to why that name existed, but you can see on this map here, it was called Transjordan. And then it eventually turned into, I believe, the Royal Kingdom of Jordan or the Royal Emirate of Jordan, one or the other, because now it's actually headed by a royal family, a lot like many other Arabian countries are. But this actually was the Mandate of Palestine. So and that's also really stupid as well when you think about it, because if the pro-Palestinians are talking about Palestine is in the mandate, that means they're also demanding that Jordan becomes a part of Palestine as well, which would make no sense, because like that just doesn't make sense at all. I don't even know how to explain that, how little sense that would make, because now not only are they against the Zionist Jews who, ended up creating the Israeli state and then ended up allowing their state allowed to exist under a UN partition plan, that also means that they would be advocating for the collapse of the Emirate of Jordan. And that makes no sense at all, because why in the world would Jordan need to collapse if they're talking about this mandate? But then if you go back to Ottoman times, and let me go get the Ottoman map of Palestine, and let me go pull that up. Let's see here, images. So, back in the day when the Ottoman Empire controlled the land, it actually looked something like this. This is, I believe, an Ottoman map from 1804 of the area, but they actually didn't even control at this point in time Egypt at all, or even the southern area of Israel. It was just kind of the northern area of Israel, some parts of modern-day Jordan, and kind of Iraq. A little bit in a way. But that's the way it looked. And back then, the Ottomans didn't really care about dividing it up into different regions per se, where it ended up being Palestine and Jordan and all that. Those were really just all considered the Ottoman Empire, and then they divided up for governance reasons, but there wasn't a specific like a religious or kind of like a cultural thing that was going into shaping up borders back then in the Ottoman Empire's times. Then before the Ottomans even existed, then the area was controlled just by, I guess you could say, the Islamic expansion, and then that eventually turned into the Ottoman Empire. But before that even, it was controlled by the Byzantines. And so let me go back to the Byzantine Empire map from, let's say, the 11th century. And let's see here. This ought to be good enough. Well, hang on. No. This isn't good enough. We got to go back to the 7th century, I believe. So let me go put up 7th century. No, not the 17th, the 7th. And there we go. This ought to be good enough. So this is what the Byzantines looked like in the 7th century. And you can actually see that the area that would be a part of Jordan, pretty much all of Israel, Syria, Lebanon, all that stuff, it was controlled by the Byzantines. And the Byzantine Empire was officially a Christian empire. So then, if we're going off of claims, then that means that just a Christian faction in the Middle East has as much of a claim to Israel as anyone else does. And y'all all know how that went because we ended up conducting several crusades. Really, the first through the fourth were the only ones that counted. And then the fourth one was a disaster anyways. But the Christians did end up controlling Israel for a while. It was the kingdom of Judea. But then even before that, the Romans controlled it. And this is pretty much the same map that you would see under Roman times, because this is the Eastern Roman Empire. The Western Roman Empire is then tacked on just as extra luggage. And then before that, it was controlled by many different people. It was controlled by the Egyptians, the Persians, the Assyrians. It was also controlled by the Israelis themselves as the kingdom of Judea, or really the kingdom of Israel. And so that is the way it looked, because there is, like, a lot of people go, like, with that question, a lot of people say, well, what did it look like before? And there really is no answer to what it looked like before. It depends on when that before is, because it went through multiple different hands. It's one of the most traded places in the world as far as who's controlling the land there. So with that, I hope that does address that the best I can. But once again, going off of everything we have here, there are actually, out of the three major religions in the world, if we're talking about religions and who has a religious claim to the land, which I'm not here to argue which one's right or wrong, but there are two religions that have a claim to the land in Israel before the Islamic faction ever does, which would be the Christians, as Christendom came into existence 400 years before Islam did, and then there's the Jews, which came into being thousands of years before Christendom or Islamism, or really the Muslim faith. Hang on, let me think. I don't even know.
Islamism.
Before Islam even came into being, several hundred years before that, and then both of those were preceded by Judaism, which was thousands of years before both. So if we're going off of who was there first, it is technically Jewish land, if we're going off of that kind of a metric. But then if you're going off of what country controlled it, then it could be anyone. So it could be the Romans, it could be the Byzantines, and then in the Byzantines, there's a million different countries that can claim it now: the Turks, the Greeks, the Egyptians, anyone. I mean, hell, the Iraqis even. And then beyond that, I mean, it's endless. I mean, it's truly endless. But the reality is that usually in the modern day, we go with culturally, who was there first, they get the land. That's why the Ukrainians own Ukraine, because culturally they were the first culture there. It wasn't the Russians, it was the Ukrainians. So they have legitimate claims over the land. Much like in the United Kingdom, the British were there first, so the British get the claim on the land. It's not French land, it's not German land, it's British land. So going off of that historical who was there first claim, the Israelis get it. Not any Christian faction, not any Muslim faction, it would be the Jewish Israelis, because they technically, historically, were the first ones there. And the historical documentation of that goes back to the times of the Egyptian kingdoms of thousands of years ago. And so with that, I hope that does address that the best I can. And thank you so much once again for support and helping this channel to keep on running. And with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, and our next one here is going to go to Marc-Andre Burnett, who puts in a 5. And thank you very much, Mark, for that support. He says, I believe in this channel since the beginning. And thank you very much for everything. And I got my flag, and my mug is en route. And LSA will never die.
And the LSA will never die, Marc-Andre Burnett. And thank you so much for the support and helping this channel to keep on running. And thank you for believing in this channel. And thank you for helping us to keep this thing rolling. Because it is just incredible to know that you enjoy this channel so much and you have faith in it. And also, thank you for getting a flag and thank you for getting a mug. I hope that you enjoy both of them. The flag, everyone said it was incredibly high quality, so I have to take it for what it is now. It's not just us saying it so that way y'all get it. It's actually incredibly high quality. And I got to thank y'all all for getting one and really enjoying those flags. And I cannot wait for you to get your mug. And so with that, thank you so much once again. I hope that does address that well. And also, another thing I saw some people saying, they said the Romans gave us a lot. Did y'all know, Mandy, did you know this? Because a lot of people say this. They're like, Roman roads lasted for thousands of years. American roads only last for a few years. Infrastructure sucks. Have you heard that before?
Oh yeah, man. They say our infrastructure sucks all the time.
Did you know, I didn't know this until 2 weeks ago, that in ancient Pompeii, there's actual proof of them fixing potholes. Did you know that?
Really?
Yeah, they actually had potholes back in the day. And what's interesting is that back in the day, the way they would fix potholes is that they would melt iron and they would pour molten iron into the hole, and then it would cool, and it would create a surface, pretty much a flat surface again to be used as the road. And I'll see if they actually have a real Roman road, and let's see if we can find one. So this would have been one, and you can actually see the original pavers down there on the ground. I'd be damned though, I can't find the whatchamacallit. Let me go to a main street, because maybe it's on the main streets instead. So you can actually see the ruts that were made by the wagon wheels that traveled through the towns of Pompeii here in the street. Those aren't just how the rocks were formed. That's actually the ruts made by wagons crossing over the rocks thousands of times. And that's a big misnomer that a lot of people have about Roman infrastructure, is that was this endless magical thing that never wore down. Roman infrastructure did wear down, and the rocks and pavers that made up these roads eventually had to be replaced, or they had to be filled in. And I wish I could find it. It's around here somewhere, because I saw picture proof of it, but they actually would fill in the deepest holes with molten iron. And they would fill in, and they would be able to keep using the roads. I think that might be one right there, actually, maybe, which is a piece of molten iron or something along those lines. But another thing that is really cool, Matthew, because in the modern day, Matthew, when they go to fill in potholes, like the concrete mixers might have a little bit of concrete that spills out of the back and onto the road, and it ends up drying there.
Yes.
The Romans had the exact same freaking thing, because they actually found, as they were clearing out the remains of Pompeii, little drops of iron that had dried on the roads where there clearly wasn't a need for any, and they supposed that was iron, that molten iron that would slosh out of the pot that they were moving as they were going to fill in the potholes. So they actually had the same kind of problems that we had in the modern day way back then.
Well, I gotta tell you what, using the molten iron, that's a lot more like advanced than using rocks. We just throw rocks over potholes now and let the cars compact it down. So
Yeah.
I think they were a little bit better back then. But let's see who said it. Terrence Custer said Roman roads didn't have the millions of vehicles on them every day that weighed thousands of pounds. That is true. Now, that's probably why they lasted a little bit longer.
And that is also true as well. But also, a lot of people don't know that modern infrastructure is way ahead. I mean, like, a lot of people don't know this, because modern infrastructure has to meet demands that have never been needed before in history, with the amount of tonnage and the amount of vehicles that pass over a road in a single day. Modern Western road infrastructure is truly thousands of years ahead of the Romans, because a modern road could survive Roman types of traffic if maintained properly for hundreds, if not thousands of years, with hardly any wear really showing, because of the weight of the vehicles that would be crossing. If we're talking about Roman vehicles on a modern road, such as wagons, they would hardly wear them down. It would take truly several hundred years for them to actually get seriously worn down and require a replacement if they were maintained properly. Roman roads at the time were really good, but in the modern day, they would not be able to tolerate modern road traffic. They would fall apart quicker than a modern road would, simply because they're archaic. I mean, and also on top of that, these kinds of roads would wear out a car in like several hundred miles. Imagine a suspension having to deal with this. It wouldn't. It would start to fall apart not that long into driving. But anyways, with that, I hope that does address that well. Just a cool little fun fact about road infrastructure back in the day, because the Romans did give us a lot, and they even gave us the first pothole fixes in history. But with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, and the next one goes to AMX10 Speedy Bang Bang, who puts in a 5 and says, "Love chat question, please." I guess AMX10 wants to know what was said by the Russian female to the American sergeant to make him go to Russia, and it was something along the lines of, "VV, would you like to speak against the West and ruin your whole life?" He said, "Count me in, buddy. Let me have a piece of that." But anyways, seriously speaking, we're going to grab that live chat question. And it goes to Old Buzzard, who says, do the ATMs in Russia still work?
Yes. From what we understand, the ATMs in Russia still work, but I think there's actually a limit on the amount you can withdraw. And so with that, I hope that does address that incredibly well. Thank you for the support, and we are on to the next one.
And the next one goes to Monsieur Gaston, who puts in a 5 and says, enough of the heavy talk. Marmot time.
Ooh, the perfect time of the night, baby. We gotta go get that marmot. Let me go pull it up. Boom, boom. Hey, it's the marmot.
Hello there. Hello there. Would you care for a plum or some rock? We have rock under my feet. Look, I need to cut my toenails, though.
I was wondering, Governor, have you heard anything from the fly? I forgot.
He's awfully silent, Governor. What's he done? He's gone quiet, Governor.
He's almost out of business, Governor. It looks like he's on the down and out for reals. Running 8-hour shows and only getting about 50 folks on at a time. Unfortunate stuff. Unfortunate. But still.
You'll do what you're told.
You'll do what you're told. To be honest, we love the marmot, don't we all? We love the marmot. And I gotta say, thank you so much for the support, Monsieur Gaston, and allowing us to have a moment with the marmot. Alan! And I gotta say, Alan the Marmot is an incredible thing to have. An absolute feature. A featured piece. And I gotta thank you so much once again for support and helping this channel to keep on running. But sadly, it's not gonna be Marmot and Fly anymore. It's just gonna be Marmot. Because from what we understand, the Fly, it's almost fiending right now. I mean, it's almost gone. So we might not have the Fly anymore, sadly. But with that, I hope that does address that well. Thank you so much once again for support and helping this channel to keep on rolling. And with that, we're on to the next one.
All right, and our next one goes to Fishing and Kayaking, who puts in a 2. And thank you very much, Fishing and Kayaking, for that support and helping to keep the channel running. And we also have a 2 from Barry Badrinoff, who says, massive Russian losses, bug or feature? I say feature.
Cringer cap, call it. But with that, thank you so much once again for support and helping this channel to keep it running. And I'd say it's a feature as well. I'd agree with you. And so with that, thank you so much once again for support. I hope that does address that well. And we are on to the next one.
All right, and our next one is going to be the Morse code decoders of the stream. And tonight we had Cliff Simonton, Mark Hodges, Earl Bernew, Paul Schultz, Kevin J, Rumpelstiltskin, David Millsaps, and also Toxic Bananas. And they said, the LSA Signal Corps reports tonight the Morse code is, Ukraine will turn the war around with the support of the West, and onwards Ukraine. Long live the LSA.
And that's the sound of money. And y'all hit that dead on the nail. Y'all hit the jackpot. That is the Morse code of the night. Y'all have gotten it correct for 804 days of war. And y'all will get it correct for another 804 days of live streams, even if the war doesn't go on another 804 days. But still, thank you so much once again for support and helping this channel to keep running. And I gotta say, thank you for getting the Morse code correct as well. And Matthew, if I'm not mistaken, we're moving on into the live chats.
Yes, and this live chat question goes to Barry Woodward, who says, how quickly could NATO take Kaliningrad?
NATO could probably take Kaliningrad within several weeks or several months, depending on how fervent a defense the garrison in Kaliningrad would give to a pushing force. If they were completely encircled from and cut off from supply, that probably means that NATO would probably be able to win within several weeks if they got to Kaliningrad, the city. But if they were not cut off from supply somehow, they could probably hold off for several months. But it really depends on how fervently they would hold on. And so with that, I hope that does address that well. And we are on to the next one.
And up next, we have a 10-pound donation, very heavy, from Butchie777, the channel legend. And Butchie777 didn't leave a comment. LSA, LSA.
And thank you so much for the support, Butchie777, and long live the Lee Spring Army. And I got to thank you for the support and not leaving a comment. And so that we are on to the next one.
That's like the same as knocking on the door and saying, turn, turn, turn. Who is it? Is anybody home? No, I'm not home. It's the same thing, man. But anyways, we're moving on to our next live chat question. And this one goes to Terrence Custer, who says, do the Belarus citizens actually support their government, or are they being held down by a dictator? And is there any chance that they'll revolt?
Hard to say. There have been some pretty big protests in the past in Belarus against the government, so there is clearly an anti-government faction that exists in Belarus. It's just that we don't know how strong they are because of the repression. The numbers on that are repressed incredibly well, and the Belarusian government doesn't really want anyone to know. I have a feeling there would be a group of people that would revolt against the Belarusian government, but a lot like Russia, I don't want to over-exaggerate that number because, as we've seen throughout the Free Russian Army incursions into the Russian Federation, there isn't really that many people who would rise up and rebel against the Russian government. They'd more so watch someone else do it, but they personally wouldn't do it themselves. So I feel like it's probably going to be the same in Belarus as it is in Russia at the moment, but it could be an entirely different scenario. It's just really hard to tell. But with that, I hope that does address that well, and we are on to the next one.
And the next one goes to a random trip who says, Enforcer Matt, do you believe there's U.S. Special Forces inside of Russia? And if you're asking me directly, I would say no. Those U.S. Special Forces would probably get caught pretty quickly because Russia has people running around like fleas looking for people that are infiltrators. That's one thing that Russia does do well, is they're able to basically sniff these people out pretty quick. They're not good at pretty much anything else except for trying to protect Putin's regime, at least internally. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would have to say no. Usually there would be operatives, spies, things like that inside of Russia, but full-on special forces, highly unlikely, because we're not in an official state of war with them, and if we did something like that, that would probably provoke an official state of war with them pretty quickly. And so with that, I hope that does address that fairly well, at least in my opinion. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And this one goes to Raphael Harris, who says, now that the IDF controls the Rafah crossing, can they allow Gazans to cross into Egypt?
They could try and do something like that, but I have a feeling they probably will not, and I have a feeling the Egyptians will not allow them to cross the border either, like they did in the past. But technically, they could do it if they wanted to. And so with that, I hope that does address that well, and we are on to the next one.
The next one goes to Epic Soup Gamer, who says, if Zelensky was killed, would the Ukrainians try to kill Putin then?
They probably would. I have a feeling that that's certainly something that would happen in retaliation. But I don't know how successful they would be in trying that, because Putin is a very scared and elusive figure, as many of y'all have seen in the past with like the 50-foot long tables. And so with that, I hope that does address that fairly well, and we are on to the next one.
And this one goes to AF Kaplan, who says, will the peace summit in Geneva still go forward after this most recent assassination attempt against Zelensky?
Yes, it probably will. He'll probably still attend, because assassination attempts are largely kind of a run-of-the-mill thing, and also leaders of governments don't really get a choice in getting to be scared. They kind of have to be scared and keep going with things. Part of the risk of the job. But still, with that, I hope that does address that fairly well, and we are on to the next one.
All right, and our next one here goes to Dale Alaticus. He says, with the rubber treads always on the Abrams tracks, do they have to rotate the treads ever so often?
Good question. Let me go pull up something about Abrams tracks. Abrams rubber tracks. Go pull that up. What are the tracks on an Abrams tank made from? They are made from steel and rubber. And let's see what the real answer is here. Okay, so let's see. Normally covered some. Let's see. Each one weighs about 60 pounds. Made of steel and rubber. The rubber on the side keeps your tank's road wheels from being damaged. If we look at the other side, you'll notice that it has a more beautiful rubber squares that allow firm grip on most any surfaces. Just like your tires, though, these rubber squares get worn down from gnawing on the earth, rock, people's faces, etc. So you have to replace them regularly. Breaking tracks on a tank is lots of fun. It involves loosening the track's tension, popping those end caps off, and then making sure your leg isn't underneath the track when it separates, or it'll break your leg. But let's see here. So basically, they do get worn down and they do have to be replaced, but that is the normal way that an Abrams track is. There isn't such a thing as like replacing it with steel or rubber. It's always rubber, and then you just replace them over time. I actually didn't know that either. I actually thought, kind of like Matthew, it was kind of interchangeable, but apparently it's always rubber.
You know where I heard that from?
Where'd you hear that from?
I heard it from you. No, I'm playing.
Man, I was about to say, I was like, I don't know if I said that, but
Where I actually heard it from, I was watching a video of some guy looking at the Abrams tank that was captured by the Russians, and he was looking it over. And clearly he was a propagandist, or otherwise he wouldn't have unfettered access inside of Russia. But I was looking at him, looking at the tank, and he was sitting there pointing at the little rubber chalks on the track, and he said the Ukrainians were in such a rush to use these tanks because they were so panicked they didn't even knock the rubber blocks out of the tracks, because that's what you do when you off-road an Abrams. And I was like, is he right about that? So I was like, I guess that sounds somewhat right. So I just kind of went with it. But now I know he was spewing BS after everyone rebuking what I said earlier. He was spewing just complete BS.
rubber pads, rubber pads, rubber pads, rubber pads. Let's see here. Can we get another one of it off-road? This was off-road. Rubber pads. Rubber pads.
They like their rubbers.
Man, it's a perfect day for a rubber every day. But beyond that, that's just the way the tracks are, because I've never seen them any other way. But I always just assume, like kind of like you did, that they probably had a harder material for the tracks, so they would pop out the rubber blocks and then they put in steel ones. But that is a complete lie. Like, that is not even true. It's just always rubber, because it's always a perfect day for rubber. But with that,
I'll have to go back and leave a comment below that video then now and let them know they're full of bollocks.
man, let's go see what Russian tracks are made of. Are those like just raw steel on like a T-72? Because I've never paid attention to that much. Like track comms. Let me go T-72B3. We'll find one of these at a parade ground somewhere. I think theirs are literally just raw steel.
Yeah, I think that may be. Maybe that's why they're confused.
Oh my god, they are. Like, that's, oh my lord, dude. No wonder, dude, when these things go down the street, you hear that clack, 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 clack from the tracks, because it's literally just steel clapping onto the ground over and over.
Yeah, the ground's literally getting clapped.
Man, stay strapped, get clapped. You know what I mean? But with that, I hope that doesn't address that well as I giggle at my own joke. But with that, we are on to the third to last question of the night.
And this one goes to, and also let me get rid of this bot real quick. He said, stop lying, it's all BS. Well, guess what, Marco? Bye-bye. But anyways, Marco Polo. This one goes to Steve's Gardening Adventures. He says, I heard today that if Ukraine gets the F-16s, that they'll treat it like a nuclear attack, and that they'll be able to respond in kind. And has anyone else heard that?
I haven't, and that would be a really weird thing for them to do, to treat a weapon like it's nuclear when it doesn't have a nuclear weapon to go along with it. That's like saying, oh my god, the Ukrainians, they got attack them, shoot them out nuclear warheads on them, kill them, it's like, yeah, like, that's a little bit of a stretch. I haven't heard that today, to be quite honest, so I would doubt that it's a thing. And so with that, I hope that does address that well, and we are on to the second to last question of the night.
And this one goes to Carrie Ann LSA, who says, what does the enforcer know about the T-42 Pruvette T and SAR tank?
The T-42, let me check that out. Super heavy tank. Hang on, let me look at this. I don't know a damn thing about this. Like, I'm not gonna lie, I have no clue. I know about the T-35 land ship, and this was, let's see. Oh, look, it was actually passed over in favor of the T-35 land ship. So I actually know nothing about the T-42, but I know a good bit about the T-35s, pictured here, which were land ships that the Russians made, well, the Soviets made back in the 30s. But I'll be honest with you, I don't know anything about a T-42. I thought this was actually an American thing that you brought up, like the T-34 heavy tank, or the super heavy, I believe it was called. But let's see here. This thing, hang on. It was developed in 1932 by the OKB-5 Design Bureau at Bolshevik Plant number 232 under the direction of German engineer designer Edward Grote. Development
That's
did
a
not.
plot twist.
Oh my lord! Development did not advance past the stage of construction drawings and scale models. Oh my lord! Well, how big was this thing going to be? How much?
And it had 2,000 horsepower. Good lord.
Oh my god!
19 horsepower per ton.
Max speed of 17 miles per hour with this fat ass at 101 tons?
That's a super heavy.
That thing is, man, that thing is heavy. You know how
That's a
heavy
fatty.
you know how heavy a mouse was? A mouse was like 128 tons. This thing was almost up there with it.
That's fat.
That is fat. It got replaced by the more practical T-35, if you can call this practical. It was 45 tons, which is about the weight. Well, it's about 15 tons less than an Abrams. Let me see if I can find a better picture. Oh, look, it's Comrade Stalin. And also, this guy got purged later. Don't worry about him. But that is a T-35 land ship and a propaganda poster. And let's see if we can find a picture of a real-life one. Here's one at the Kupinka Tank Museum. It was stupid.
That's
yes.
Ugh.
It has 5 turrets, Matthew. It has 2 machine gun turrets, one on the front and one behind the main turret up top. And then it has 2 secondary gun turrets with 37mm guns in each of them. One in the front, one in the back. Then it has a short-barreled, I think it was a 57, I think it may even be a 75mm short-barreled gun in the top turret that also had a machine gun in it as well. All turrets had 1 machine gun in them each, meaning that this thing was truly, by definition, a land ship, which is a bizarre concept, and they didn't really use these a lot in the Great War, or the World War II, as we call it. They ended up kind of holding these things behind the lines because they were already obsolete by the time World War II. But still, a stupid tank. But I hope that kind of addresses the T-42 a little bit, since this was kind of the real T-42. But I have no knowledge about the T-42. But with that, we are on to the final question of the night. And so, who is the lucky last person who threw in the lucky last question of the night?
And this question goes to Kilroy Was Here, who says, as bad as Russian equipment has performed, that if Putin gave the order to fire off nukes, do you think that the generals would actually fulfill the order? And I think that would be his last order.
I think that, it certainly would be his last order, because he wouldn't survive the American response to that for sure, or the British and French response as well. But as far as them carrying out that order, I really think it depends on the circumstance. If Russia was actually being invaded and they were going to collapse, I think that they would actually launch them off. But in the war in Ukraine, as it currently is going, for them to launch nukes, I have a feeling that they would actually probably refuse the orders, even if it meant possible imprisonment. A lot like many Soviets did in the past when they were given the order to fire. So with that, I hope that does address that quite well. I mean, it's kind of a short answer in my opinion, because there's not really a lot of analysis to go off of there. It's just kind of raw gut intuition. I have a feeling they probably wouldn't follow through with the order. But with that, I hope that does address that fairly well, and we have reached the end of tonight's stream. I've got to thank each and every one of you for enjoying this channel tonight. It's been absolutely a pleasure to run this thing. At the peak tonight, we had 7.5 thousand people here, and 44,000 people have watched this stream before it ended. We are entirely appreciative of each and every one of y'all for watching this channel and enjoying it and hopefully getting something out of it. And if you're one of those people who did get something out of it, I thank you. Make sure to subscribe, make sure to like, make sure to comment. It makes us incredibly happy. And I got to thank you all once again for watching. I got to thank you all once again for enjoying. And we will see you all tomorrow at 10 p.m. Eastern Time to cover the next 24 hours of the news of the war in Ukraine. And so with that, good night, good luck, take care, stay safe, Slava Ukraini, and long live the Lee Spring Army. The Lee Spring Army will never die.
And the Lee Spring Army shall never die. And with that, folks, thank you all for another great stream tonight. We'll see you tomorrow night at 10 p.m. Eastern, and also midday for the short war summary as well. And thank you all once again, and Slava Ukraine, Herom Slava. And with that, get some rest, and good night.
Yes.